Hello and welcome to the highly anticipated first day of the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021. I'm so excited to be kicking off this year's summit. My name is Isabelle Vladoiu and I'm the Senior Research Associate and a member of the board at US Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. For this incredible two-day event, we have prepared an amazing lineup of speakers joining us from all over the world with some engaging topics. We're starting today with 3 sessions tackling the subject of human rights, and we will hear from our distinguished guests on the impact that human rights education has, the importance of religious freedom, and how to work together to uphold women's rights. Then we will reconvene tomorrow for a full day on cultural and economic diplomacy. Myself and the entire USIDHR team have been working tirelessly for the past few months to ensure we make this experience one to remember. And we cannot wait to show you what we have prepared. So thank you all for joining us today. Make sure you engage in the conversation using the hashtag USIDHR Summit 2021. And let us know where you are right now and where you're watching us from. I'm joining from London. Let me know down below in the comments. As a truly international organisation, we are so proud of our team and volunteers from all across the world who have helped bring this amazing experience to life. We salute you all and welcome you once again. Obviously, we could not have done this without the amazing support and leadership from our founder, Isabelle Vladoiu. It is under her expert guidance that the entire team has been able to flourish, and so to introduce you more to her work, I invite you to watch a short video.
My name is Isabelle Vladoiu, and I'm deeply honored to participate in this summit.
Well, please welcome international specialist on human rights law, best-selling author and founder of US Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, Ms. Isabelle Vladoiu, your host for the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021. Sorry, might still be touching up her lipstick. Anyway, whilst we're waiting for Isabelle to join us, obviously that video showed you some of the amazing work she's been doing over the past few years, and we're really so grateful.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests, participants joining us from all over the world, it is my honor to have you here today. And on behalf of the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, I'd like to welcome you all to the first day of the 2021 Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. It's a privilege to host our second annual summit and bring this event to your homes, live streaming from the USIDHR headquarters in Washington, D.C. Last year, we ran our first ever summit at USIDHR, and it was a big challenge. At the time, virtual summits and events were still fairly new, and as my experience lies in running in-person events at the United Nations, in the United States Congress, and forums all over the world, translating this framework online was still quite a task. But we did it, and it was a huge success with over 10,000 people tuning in over the 3 days from practically each corner of the earth. This year, we wanted to go even bigger and reach a larger audience with new speakers and a wider variety of topics. We can. And while many other forums or summits touch the subject of human rights or peace or diplomacy, the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit is a truly unique event and the first one to have dared to combine the two together. As an international specialist in human rights law and a practitioner of NGO diplomacy for over a decade, I've seen these two concepts often intertwined. And there is also the concept of diplomacy of human rights as a whole, which looks at ways on how countries, especially emerging powers, can promote human rights in their foreign policies as a key part of bilateral agreements or relationships. At the same time, it means diplomacy aimed at strengthening international rules in the field of human rights by recognizing new types of rights, such as, for example, the right to peace. I founded USIDHR with the aim of advancing education for all and provide solutions to enhance the understanding of these two concepts, diplomacy and human rights. But soon, this organization grew into something much bigger with teams and volunteers across the world. Our educational programs have reached millions of people, and even during a challenging year as a 2021, we were able to train over 3,000 individuals as human rights consultants. We are now teaching others in their communities. And the true challenge was not actually to transition to online trainings or to build a student platform to allow anyone from any corner of the world to graduate from their corner and from their comfort of their own homes, but to provide for those who cannot afford an education, those vulnerable children who have been robbed of their right to quality education. So through our humanitarian program at USIDHR, Edu for Every Child, we provided hundreds of children from Pakistan with much needed resources and school supplies to go to school for an entire year. And we are on the way to help many more, every year adding a new country such as Liberia, Afghanistan, Ghana, Kenya, Romania, and the list goes on. For those joining for the first time, I welcome you. These 2 days are more than just a summit, are more than just an event. It's about looking back at what we did to make the world a better place. It's kind of like a New Year's Eve, if you want to call it like that, where we get to look back at what actions we took and share them with you all. So for this, I'd like you to ask you to watch again together the short video that my team prepared just for you. So we want to invite you to join us in 2022. This concludes our opening ceremony, and now allow me to officially begin the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021 with the first panel of discussion on the subject of human rights education. As Ms. Flavel was telling you, we have ahead of us 2 full days of surprises with an amazing lineup of speakers. To go over the agenda a bit before we start with our first panel of the day, today we are going to start with the Human Rights Education panel, followed by an amazing discussion on religious freedom with amazing panelists and guests. And then the last panel of the day will be focusing on women's rights and specifically our Let Her Lead program, which you'll get to hear soon from that. In the evening, however, we also have 2 amazing breakout sessions that I want you to not miss them, okay? The first breakout session starts right here on the same page. Just come on the Facebook page or YouTube, wherever you're watching us right now from, to watch a panel discussion in a breakout session with a special guest, Mr. Jarvis Bestman, on the subject of children's education. He will be joined by President Manuel Wancha. And then at 7 o'clock p.m., on this page again, you have to continue to stay on because we will have another breakout session, this time, which is going to be delivered particularly entirely in Spanish. So I don't want you to miss that. We have an amazing lineup of speakers for the breakout sessions as well. For the Spanish panel, we have Ms. Vicky Levia, who's our human rights consultant. We are very proud of leading that panel as well. Then tomorrow, we start at the same time at 11 a.m. with a panel discussion on cultural diplomacy, followed by another panel discussion on economic diplomacy. And I want to share with you that we have so many surprises throughout this entire 2 days event that you can't miss a thing. So if you are thinking right now, you're at work, you're doing something else, stop whatever you're doing and let us know where you're joining from. Let us know why you're joining the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. What do you hope to get out of this? This is an amazing event that my team and I, we've been working for months to put together and be able to share it with you all so that you are here with us today. I'm very grateful for you being here with us today. So to introduce you, without further ado, I'm going to take a couple of minutes to introduce you to the first topic of the day, which is obviously very dear to my heart. For over a decade, I've been working as an international human rights specialist, and I've been on both sides of the fence, if you want to call it like that, okay? My background education is in the legal field. I have 2 master's degree in human rights law, so I've been educated to become a lawyer. However, at one point in my life, I realized that I can do more by helping other people understand their human rights and not necessarily only fight when violations of human rights occur. And that was the moment when I discovered that human rights education about human rights or for human rights, it's so important in every society. If we want to achieve prosperity, if we want to be able to flourish, to develop countries, I'm not talking only about good emerging powers, okay? I'm talking about any country in this world that upholds, respects, and promotes human rights. It's a country that helps their people. It's a country that is prosperous, that works good, and has economics as well, because there is an entire link between that. And you will see throughout the course of the 2 days and hear from our distinguished guests and panelists that basically everyone are going to share about their works, about what they are currently doing to make sure you understand that there are so many different avenues in which you can promote these two subjects, diplomacy and human rights. So why human rights education, you might ask me? Well, the concept of human rights has been an ongoing concern, okay? Its evolution and development, that didn't start today, okay? It can be seen throughout history with the oldest evidence dating back to Cyrus the Great, okay? The Cyrus cylinder, if you're familiar. The term human rights has been going through a series of transformations so that it moved to the understanding we have today about human rights. We didn't have this term always, okay? If you look at the chronology on how human rights came to be, you'll discover that chairing the committee, the drafting committee of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was the first document that proclaimed at an international level the term human rights. Chairing the drafting committee at that time, Mrs. Eleanor Roosevelt, she gave an unforgettable speech in which she suggested that the term the rights of men be changed to that of human rights. And here's the reason why. She added in her speech that all people should unite under one banner, the human race, instead of just being citizens or residents of nation states, such as, being a citizens of France, of the United States, of the Great Britain, and so forth. And that the fight against inequalities, injustice, and demand for these freedoms is necessary for building a resilient democratic society. Well, that happened before even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted on December 10, 1948. We are actually getting ready to celebrate another anniversary on December 10 this year. Every year, the United Nations and the world celebrates International Human Rights Day, which is the day when the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted. But let's think back to it. And I want for you to understand that through my experience, through my life working on the both sides of the fence, when violations of human rights occur, and also before on prevention methods, sometimes there's something more than just fighting that is needed. Do you know what that is? That is solutions. In my decade-long career, I have come to understand that we can do more by educating people about their rights. I personally taught over 15,000 people, from students to community leaders and even government officials, and I was able to see change when human rights education is implemented, starting from a small community to effecting change in different countries. I now travel the world and spread my knowledge and education, talking with heads of governments, foreign officials, the U.S. Members of the U.S. Congress and Senate. And I'm trying my best also to teach anyone, not only in my community, going beyond my community, about human rights. Because at one point I realized that it cannot just be me in this world that has to work on prevention or promote human rights education. My lifetime, it's limited. It's not going to help me. And I'm not going to be able to create such a great impact in this big world if I am by myself. So therefore, hence the reason I created the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, to make sure that I allow young people, younger generations, to lead the torch And also, together with my team at USIDHR and our amazing volunteers, as you saw in so many different countries around the world, we are able to spread the message of education and advancing education for all. And we do that not only by educating other people through our trainings, online courses, educational programs, but also we are doing this by helping those who need it most through our charitable program, because in the end, we are a charity organization. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So all the proceeds, all the donations, all the fundings we use to help children around the world go to school, to help them afford an education. Because I don't know how many of you know, but there are 258 million children in this world that need education, that cannot go to school, not because they don't want to go to school, not because they don't care. It's because they don't afford. They cannot afford. Their families are poor and they cannot afford to go to school. And this is not a statistics that I came up with, okay? I just want to back it up. UNICEF published these statistics back in 2019. Since then, we've been through very, very challenging time. And I can't even emphasize enough how much this pandemic aggravated the situation, not allowing children all over the world go to school. And here's, before I start introducing our panelists for today, here's what I want you to learn and know if you didn't know that already. If you look at the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the dream of Eleanor Roosevelt and the drafters of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was that they shall be taught everywhere, anywhere. In that end, how can you stand up or defend your rights if you don't know what they are? Only through human rights education we are able to give due importance to these rights and remind ourselves why they must not be neglected. So without further ado, we would like to now start the first panel in the first day of Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit, the panel on human rights education. I will ask my team to add everyone, all our distinguished guests and panelists in the room, and we'll be back together. Thank you. And we are back with the first panel in Diplomacy and Human Rights Day. Just give me a couple of minutes. We will allow the other panelists to join. But meanwhile, I have two amazing people who I had a pleasure to be working and knowing for many years now. So allow me to introduce them to you. Mr. James Dold, who's the CEO and founder of Human Rights for Kids, and Mr. Mohammed Ahmad, who's the co-founder and director of Global Peace Chain. The way it's going to work, I am going to introduce and tell a bit more about your work for each one of you, and then you'll have about 5 to 7 minutes to discuss your work in relation to the topic of the day. Tell us about the wonderful things you've been doing in promoting human rights for kids, for all, in global peace. And immediately after that, we will have a Q&A session where it's going to be like a panel discussion where we're going to take some questions from the audience and discuss among ourselves about those. So let me first start with Mr. James Dold, who's the CEO and founder of Human Rights for Kids, an organization dedicated to the promotion and protection of human rights for children. Mr. Dold is a lawyer, a child's rights advocate, and a true change maker, as results speak louder than anything. Since he founded the Human Rights for Kids organization, he has helped introduce over 30 bills in the U.S. Congress and state legislators and inspired policies advancing child justice reforms. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce you to my dear friend, Mr. James Dold, and allow him to share more of his work changing the country's juvenile justice system. Mr. Dold, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and it's a pleasure to be here with my fellow panelists. And I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to present a little bit about our work and talk about one of the most pressing moral issues of our day, which is the human rights violations that are taking place against children in the U.S. criminal legal system. A little bit of background about our organization. We were founded in 2017 by a bipartisan group of state policymakers who really span the ideological and political spectrum. They included Republicans and Democrats from states as diverse as Arkansas and Utah to Vermont and Hawaii. And part of the reason that we did that in making our board so diverse when we were first getting started was this idea that we really needed, in order to really make a full-throated campaign around advancing human rights protections for children, we really needed to make sure that these issues were seen as bipartisan, that we were able to develop bipartisan solutions, working with folks on all from all walks of life and on both sides of the political aisle, and working with all interested stakeholders to make sure that people understood the gravity of what we were talking about. And for our board and for myself, there was a recognition early on that not only were these significant human rights violations happening against children in the legal system, but that oftentimes these violations were occurring against some of our most vulnerable children. And we really weren't talking about children who come into conflict with the law through this victim lens, right? Because oftentimes, especially when we're talking about kids who commit more serious sorts of crimes like robbery and murder and the like, we get so focused, and rightly so to some degree, we get so focused on the underlying criminal act that we completely disregard child status and don't ask the important question of how and why this child ended up in this situation to begin with. And we begin to prod and ask those questions. What we begin to identify is the fact that so many of them are dealing with adverse childhood experiences and early childhood trauma. So, for example, when we look at the number of girls in this country who've been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, over 80% of them were victims of both physical and sexual violence prior to being involved in the underlying offense that resulted in their lengthy prison sentence. And this carries on for most kids who are prosecuted in the adult criminal legal system. So, for example, there have been numerous studies that have shown that about 90% of all youth who are adjudicated in the juvenile justice system have experienced at least two adverse childhood experiences, and that can range from anything from physical and sexual abuse to living with a family member who has substance abuse issues to having an incarcerated parent. Sort of these traumas that really can manifest themselves in really devastating ways, particularly for children whose brains are still developing. We know that trauma has a significant impact on the developing mind of a child, and it oftentimes that trauma is what results in kids looking for those things that they're missing. So whether it's love or compassion, a sense of camaraderie, sometimes it's safety, particularly when we're talking about some of the neighborhoods where these kids grow up. But the legal system, for the vast majority of our history, has completely disregarded that history of both child status and the victimization of children, which led them to the system to begin with. And so for us, there was this intuitive recognition that the system as it's currently constructed really wasn't doing right by our children, and which was resulting in these larger scale human rights violations. So, what do I mean by that when I say these larger scale human rights violations? Well, in 2018, the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights released a scathing report against the United States' treatment of children in the criminal legal system, and specifically, the commission highlighted how the UN Committee on Human Rights had found that because the United States, through one of the treaties that we had signed and ratified, which was the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, because we made a reservation in that treaty under Articles 10 and Articles 14, which specifically designate that children are supposed to be treated differently and in the juvenile system rather than the adult system. Because we had made a reservation that said we were going to treat youth as adults in particularly serious cases, but we didn't really specify what that actually meant. The committee found that we had converted that reservation into an expansive gap, which has resulted in the violation of children's human rights at the local, state, and federal level. And specifically, the commission went on to note that the US is doing things like sentencing children by the same standards we use for adults. That is, imposing the same exact mandatory minimum sentences for children, not sentencing children as if they were different, but sentencing them the same way that we sentence adults, imposing punishments that have been prohibited under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, such as a sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, placing children in adult jails and prisons, which elevates their risk for physical and sexual violence. This is one of the reasons that the Prison Rape Elimination Act was actually needed, because we had so many kids who were being placed in adult jails and facilities with older adult prisoners, and they were being raped and they were being physically assaulted. And that still goes on to this day, where there are significant violations of that act, where we see the sexual and physical violence against kids who are placed into these really unforgiving settings. This includes the use of solitary confinement on youth. We saw this a lot during the pandemic, where the need for social distancing was pretext for placing kids into solitary confinement, right? Not having due process protections in place, so allowing children to be interrogated without the assistance of legal counsel, where we know that they're at an increased risk not only of not understanding what their constitutional rights are, but being more likely to waive those rights. And for very trivial reasons, which is their promise that they, cooperate and say what the police want them to say, that they'll be able to go home, right? But then whatever they say, whatever statements they make, are then used against them. So we don't protect their legal rights as they enter the system either, which is another grave violation of human rights under Article 37 of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. And folks might be asking, well, how does this, and let me say two other things too, the other two big human rights violations we see against kids in the legal system, not having a minimum age for juvenile court jurisdiction. This is how kids as young as 4, 5, and 6 in states all across the country have been arrested. Folks might be familiar with a recent article from ProPublica that was published relating to a case out of the state of Tennessee, where kids were, elementary school children were arrested on charges that didn't exist. But they were able to do that because there is no minimum age in Tennessee, just like in 28 other US states, for arresting children and holding them accountable, right? And this is significant because there's a cornerstone of American law is this idea that you have to have what is known as mens rea, that is criminal intent, in order to be convicted of a crime. And for children that young, that is children under the age of 10 or 12, there are very real questions about whether or not they even have the capacity to form criminal intent. Do they really know exactly what they're doing to the point which we're going to hold them to the same standards as a 20, 25, 30-year-old adult? particularly when we're talking about elementary school children, 5 and 6 year olds, again, that have been arrested in numerous states. And then the other thing is making sure that the juvenile court jurisdiction is extended to all children under the age of 18. There are 3 states right now that exclude 17-year-old children from juvenile court jurisdictions. Those are Texas, Wisconsin, and Georgia. And so, really step back and look at the broader array of human rights violations, what we're really talking about to sort of put all of this into context for people. And these, again, are violations of 2 significant human rights documents, the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. When we look at the human rights violations specifically against children as a result of our failure to ratify and be in compliance with those documents, what we are talking about is the largest government sanctioned human rights violation against children in the world today. Let me repeat that. The United States, which claims to be a beacon of human rights, is engaged in one of the largest government sanctioned human rights violations against children in the world today. And most of these children that we're talking about, by the way, are Black and brown children. Roughly every year, 76,000 children are prosecuted as adults in the adult criminal legal system. 83% of those children are racial minorities. So it is impossible to discompartmentalize the issue of racial justice and the need for juvenile and criminal justice reform specifically around children without talking about the interplay and intersection of these issues, which is another very important issue, especially in the wake of George Floyd and everything that's happened in our country over the last couple of years. There's so much more I could say. I need to stop because I need to make sure my other panelists have a chance to present, but I'm really excited to be here, talk more about what we can do going forward to remedy some of these human rights violations. And with that, Isabelle, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back over to you before I take up too much more time.
Thank you so much, Mr. Dold. This is absolutely amazing and exciting things that you are sharing with our audience, with your expertise, obviously, in this field, working now for many years, not only for human rights for kids, but also your work that you've done before as a lawyer, trying to bring to justice and trying to reform a justice system that, as you mentioned, it's faulty. And especially right now in the United States, children are so important, and we should take an utmost care about everyone around us. So I know all the great things you're doing, and I'm so excited to have you here. And for now, I'll give the floor to the next panelist, and then at the end we can all talk about more and take some questions from the public. But thank you for that intervention and for letting the door open to a bit more into what you're currently doing. So our next speaker for today is Mr. Mohammed Ahmad. He is the co-founder and director of Global Peace Chain, which is an organization with consultative status at the United Nations and has a footprint in 140 countries that brings together young leaders from all over the globe to advocate for peace in their communities, countering violence, hate, and all forms of discrimination. Mr. Ahmad travels the world to identify such leaders and hosts community-based programs, youth camps, and the annual Global Peace Summit. Since 2018, his organization has empowered more than 10,000 youth and has trained many others to act as leaders in their communities, preaching the value of humanity, equality, and justice. So it is my pleasure to have Mr. Mohammed Ahmad at the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021 and give him the opportunity to share more about his passion for global peace. So Mr. Ahmad, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Isabelle, for a very kind introduction. I really appreciate, and I'm very glad to be the part of this prestigious summit, which is really capturing human rights and, of course, talking about fair justice for every human being at this globe. So, coming forward to the important points I want to discuss, but before that, I would like to be very much fair to, you know, uh, except that Team USIDHR has really pulled all efforts together to organize this summit, and I know that they have been working a lot from last couple of months, and they are really striving hard to ensure that they must engage relevant stakeholders, young people, and the community leaders where we talk about human rights, where we make policies for people, where we talk about child abuse and demand fair justice for everybody. So thanks, Isabelle and the team USIDHR, the headquarters, who has really done tremendous work. I must appreciate that. So coming to your particular question, and I'm glad to share that I have written 10 points, which I will speak out from my heart and definitely believe, which we discuss, we should talk about the ongoing crises our countries are facing, and of course the threat to humanities specifically. But else I would like to discuss a couple of things which our organization manifests to. So Global Peace Chain is an international organization, and we are cultivating the culture of tolerance, inclusivity, harmony, justice, human rights, and talking about inclusivity, and we are speaking on religious tolerance, cultural tolerance, acceptance. So the mission is being carried out by our 3,000 plus global peace ambassadors around the globe, and we are connecting community-based activities for amplifying our voice. We are organizing the annual massive multi-events we are calling young leaders who are actually driving real social change in the communities to come up to our platform, propose solutions to the challenges our communities are facing to achieve UN SDG 2030. So I'm glad that GPC, within just the efforts of 3 years, through our like massive network around the globe, we have been successful to organize hundreds of community-based events, plenty of international conferences where we are talking about justice, peace, human rights, and of course, this is a very pressing issue, that's climate change, which is really occurring to all of us today, and we are speaking and trying to relate climate action for peace. So there's a lot to discuss about the organization, but I see if we all work together the way we are showing up right now and promote togetherness, make more collaboration, networking, then definitely we can achieve the mutual challenges which every country is facing, starting from child abuse, climate change, human rights violation, migration issues. These is happening in several countries, human trafficking, educational crisis we are countries are facing, and specifically the pandemic has told us that the entire world has a poor medical system, and every medical system in the country which was really being claimed more advanced was collapsed, and it really reflects our intentions, our priorities, and I think that this is a really area to work together. And of course, we have very powerful institutions who are focusing to address the common challenges we are having. So, if the host allow me, then I can go with my flow. Otherwise, we can definitely take questions according to the relevancy.
No, you can totally go ahead, Mr. Ahmad, and tell us a bit on exactly what Global Peace Chain has been doing in getting into the prevention part of human rights, educating young generations on what they need to do in their communities to fix those problems that you were talking about, sanitation, public health problems, and so forth.
Great. Thank you very much for the question, Isabelle and the team and the panelists here today. I'm glad to share that we believe in practical implementations. We believe that young people should always be mobilized to take some proactive actions to address the common challenges we are facing. And I'm glad to share that starting from Pakistan, expanding to Europe, Middle East, Africa, South America, North America, and all the continents, we have established a very active setup which we call under the leadership of country directors, assistant country directors, and our very worthy, influential global peace ambassadors. Talking about particularly about the human rights, I think that there are several deep discussions to be made about this human rights violation. To like just coming up to the actions we are taking, we just see that there has been gender violence in African countries, in Asian countries, and in underdeveloped countries. Of course, and of course it's a global issue. But what we are talking, we are taking actions. We see that human rights are being breached in different countries. We see that child are not being given free education, which really allows for the article and the constitutions of the organizations and the countries. We see that people are not being treated equally. People are not getting fair justice. The rich elite is suppressing the poor. We see the dominance of the rich elites, influential people. So at this stage, we really believe that our young peace ambassadors should continue actively state peace education in the educational institutions, in the religious institutions, and the community-based activities, and to conduct community-based activities. So, luckily, in Burundi, recently we established our setup there where we were talking about hygiene, we were talking about sanitation, and we were empowering the university students to take some actions which really engage young people in the community to continue for education of the medical education, health education, and take some necessary education steps to initiate all those things which the community is missing through. We talk about Asia, in India, in Pakistan, in Nepal, in some other countries. We saw that people were really suffering through the equal access of the vaccination, the medical treatment. So what the Global Patient was doing, we really mobilized our entire network. We were trying to work with the community organizations there. We were fulfilling the basic needs. We were working on the food supplies. We were working on the medical supplies. And you will be glad to hear that Global Patient volunteered 10,000 members to 30 nations, where we were ready to give our services to any nation, any continent without any self-interest. And we were just making sure that the maximum human we can save, the maximum supplies we can provide, the maximum assistance we can do. So we were just working on this tirelessly, and our efforts were recognized by various institutions and the governments. So I'm sure that when it comes to human rights, we all keep rights. We all keep the purpose of living here. So I think that coming to the legislation, institutional reforms, I think that our governments take the responsibility, should take the responsibility to treat every human equally. But unfortunately, that's really a dreamy thing you and me are talking about here, like getting justice without any kind of pressure and things like that. It's an ideal stage. But unfortunately, what you and me are witnessing, that people are not being treated fairly. We're not getting justice the way we really look forward, because we are the citizen of the respective nation, and our constitution promises to provide all the basic things. The laws are there, the institutions are there, but they are not being reformed. They are not being implemented. So what we are doing, we are empowering young people to continue and strive hard to promote their social activism, amplify their voice, become a peaceful pressure group, emphasize on the crisis you're facing, and we are also trying to bridge young stakeholders with the government and the ministries to include them in policy making. And I'm very glad to share that one of our delegates who came to Turkey last month, where we organized International Peace Summit, which was joined by 110 youngsters, one of the Kenyan delegate is contesting for the government in the upcoming election. So I see the people we are empowering, the people we are working is going to be legislators, are going to be in the parliament, and definitely they will do their best to ensure that all the citizens, all the community members are like having their utmost stake will be given a free and fair justice. Unfortunately, I have to speak here because it's very important to be fair to ourselves either. When we talk about justice, when we talk about supplies, when we talk about all the basic necessities we really need, and we see that the European countries, the countries who are really developed, rich in economy, they are definitely giving all those potential resources to their citizens. But when we see about underdeveloping countries, Africa, Asia, and many other countries, we see that people even do not have access to water. People are really suffering to get 3 times of meal. It's also a human right. It's also your basic right to at least get all those things which everybody else is enjoying. So coming to the history, we see that we have not been treated equally since the establishment of these worlds. We see that we have been seeing that women, child were burning alive in the olden age. We saw that the women were not being treated equally. We saw the patriarchy. We saw the male dominant society. We saw the justices being only given to the influential and higher people. So I at these things which we really want to conclude here. I see, friends, that if you just look at the institution where we all have pledged is United Nations, and United Nations hold the leash of each country and have such dominance, power, financial resources, influence to make sure that the citizens of the entire world are being treated equally. Unfortunately, at the Polish border these days, the migrants, the refugees from the Belarus who really escape from there and want to enter EU, They are dying because of cold, because of winter sickness there at the border. I saw a video at TRT today where a dog, inspection dog, was like living on a laying human who was sleeping, and he was trying to just checking him he's alive or dead. I see that the current situation really tells and demands European Union to open the border for the Belarus citizens. They are not only from Belarus, they are from the different countries who are really struck and stranded and have suffered to hard conditions. But we see the nexus of the European Union, which can sanction any country just because of their interest, are not allowing the few hundred refugees who wants to enter at the European side. You think that they are really consider themselves as a champion of peace, champion of human rights, and what else they are doing? I see like people are dying. They are having shortage of food. They are dying with cold. They are children. My friend James was talking about child abuse. My friend was telling that how the children are being treated in the United States and different countries. I see it's not only the older age people and the young people. Also, the minor child are dying because of hunger, because of cold weather over there. So where are the international organizations, where are the nations? Why the UN is not intervening to release them from that particular situation and enter into the Polish border or any other country? Because they should go with an open heart. Pakistan, a country with thriving economy, we are sheltering 3 million Afghan refugees suffered from war and terror. We were opening a big heart. We were giving them food, a peaceful shelter, security, and everything. Turkey is sheltering almost 4 and 5 million Syrian and other Middle East refugees. So I think that if the countries who are striving with economies versus the countries who have a very established and well-packed economy, I think they should look forward for the policies. They want to opt for human rights of every human being. They want to opt for the people who are less privileged. I think that that's really not like fair treatment to the human being. And here comes the role of United Nations. You see, in Yemen, what is happening in Yemen? Yemen is facing and suffering to the mightiest hunger regime. Children are dying over there. If you talk about Kashmir, the people are living in strict lockdown. If you talk about Palestine, Israel's systematic terrorism of Israel is crushing people in Palestine, not from last couple of weeks or months, but from like several years. They're not getting justice. So there are lots of big stories to talk about, like war-torn countries, and talk about the recent change in Afghanistan. We share a border with them. So in Afghanistan, there's a new government. The government was toppled by Taliban, and okay, if the government is there, let's talk to them. Let's release them financial aid. US has seized their billions of dollars. International community is not releasing aid to the Afghanistan. What is happening ultimately? The people of Afghanistan are going to suffer. The common human beings are going to suffer with hunger. We hear that they are currently suffering with wheat. They're currently suffering with like basic food supplies. So if you are just talking that you are champion of human rights, the institutions over there, but unfortunately you are not able to ensure your own implementations, your own constitution. So I think that there is no need of nations. I think there is no need of big institutions who just like enjoying the luxuries, 5 star, 7 star luxury, a big building in the New York. And unfortunately, they are not going to protect the common human being because they consider them a lesser human. Okay, if you are white, if you're living in US and you have a competition, and I would say with a other person in the Yemen who is not a big home, or I think
Okay, I think the
that
connection
if you
is
consider
cutting off a bit. Thank you so
most
much,
lowest person I have
Mr.
seen. So
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmad. We will have an opportunity to talk, but I think you brought up so many important points. And while you were talking, I had the opportunity to take a peek into the comment section, and I want to say hello again for everyone watching us from all over the world, and a lot of them, from many countries in the world, and asking you tons of questions. You definitely can see your impact around the world. One of the questions that raise up is like how can they join your organization. So as you can see, everyone here, we are at USIDHR, we are trying to bring you different perspectives from like lawyers who are working on policies to human rights advocates that try to make the world. And one thing that I want to emphasize in Mr. Ahmad's speech, which I think if you didn't cut that was a very, very important point. And many times we wait for governments or we wait for the United Nations to do something about it, to end up human rights violations or take action somewhere. However, it is much more important that us as citizens or international organization, nonprofit organization, we go out there and do the work for them and don't wait for them to come up with the solution, because we are indeed the solution. And I think Global Peace Chain sets up a very good example by just doing that. And you pointed out some many examples of the wonderful things. So thank you so much again, Mr. Ahmad. Please stay with us. We will talk more in the Q&A section. It was wonderful to hear you about your work. I would like now to go to our next guest of the day, who is Ms. Marice Morales. She's an attorney on immigration, criminal defense, and personal injury. She's a fearless advocate for human rights in the community and has previously served as an elected legislator in the Maryland House of Delegates, being also the first Latina to represent District 19 in Montgomery County, as well as working in the Public Defender's Office in New Orleans and the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in San Jose, Costa Rica. As legislator, she has sponsored a series of laws aimed at reforms in the criminal justice system, protection of immigrant communities, and protecting workers' rights. Ms. Morales received the Governor's Award for her work combating human trafficking and was recognized in 2019 as one of the top 100 most influential Latina leaders in DC, Maryland, and Virginia metropolitan area. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to have Attorney Morales here with us today at the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021, and give her the opportunity to share more about how she's doing it, not only from a policy and legislative perspective, but also from a fearless advocate for the community here. So Ms. Morales, we are so excited to have you here. You have the floor now.
Thank you so much, Isabelle, and I am so honored to be a part of this distinguished panel and just listening to the allies and the leaders around the globe. So thank you for your own leadership, and I know it's not easy. So as Isabelle pointed out in her generous words, I started out in the international realm. I am a daughter of Peruvian immigrants. I am married to a French citizen, so we speak in French at home, and always have had a heart for humanity and interested in the international human rights realm. And as a young attorney, I just realized, and it was a very disappointing realization, and that is, here in the United States, we have a sense of self-righteousness that doesn't allow us to get out of our own way. We don't listen to the international community. We don't listen to the international jurisprudence around the most basic international human rights. And as we honor the United Nations Treaty and Declaration of Human Rights, I have had the privilege and honor to have been able to push for for those rights here domestically. And I think as a young lawyer, just coming into that realization that in America, we're not doing enough, right, to honor human life. We value corporations over people, and we are quickly moving into a space where human life does not have the same meaning. And so as a legislator, as a member of, and actually just, I would like to address the question, right? The question of today's conversation, which is how civil society organizations and regular citizens address the lack of education about human rights. And that really speaks to the core of what I'm talking about. And that is the lack of acknowledgement from the American point of view, in that we need to listen to these international bodies, right? And centuries and of work, and that America does not have the answer to everything. Actually, we don't, and we have a lot of work to do. So in the legislature, a lot of the things that I touched on are ingrained in just creating access of opportunity for all people, and seeing those that are being left behind. And I know that sounds like very fluffy language, but what I'm talking about is the right to a quality of life that we all deserve through the dignified pay. And we have this in we have Article 2024 of our human rights, the Declaration of Human Rights, and that is, we should not be living to just to work. We should have access to paid holidays and paid parental leave, so that we can actually enjoy our life with our families. Something as simple as that. This is something that we still have to advocate for, and that's why the presence of labor unions and the like are so important. And when it comes to speaking in terms of human rights, I can already tell you that just being in the room when we're legislating, or when we're listening to members of the community testifying, right? If anybody brings up international law or human rights law, it's almost like their eyes just glaze over. It's like, oh, that's not something that's relevant here. And so then I decided to use my talents and my skills to then change domestic policy with that international perspective and bringing that conversation. One of the things that I was able to work on when I was at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights in San Jose was around this idea, this space of using military action against migrants. And in particular, I was privileged and honored to work on the matter of USIDHR versus the Dominican Republic, and speaking of the Haitian relations, the Haitian and Dominican relations. And in that case, 14 Haitian migrants were gunned down by military officers at the border. And so in America, where we have a broken immigration system, and we have used law enforcement at our border, we are just, we're just a couple of leaps away from using excessive force at the front lines. And during the previous administration, we have violated a number of human rights violations when separating families, separating toddlers from their parents and their mothers, and this country will be held accountable by the international court system. And so to the extent that in my lifetime, along with the individuals who are on this panel, and those of you that are joining this conversation from around the globe, or those of you that are in American soil, we need to be more conscientious about who we're electing, and that we are looking at the members of our communities and our society as fellow human beings whose rights where all of our rights are equal. Now, on the criminal defense side, so now I'm going to take off my legislator hat, and then also now go into the court system. And so the Articles 5 through 11 of the UN Convention on the rights, our international human rights laws, they address due process, access to impartial tribunals, and obviously access to adequate legal counsel. And we don't have that in America. We don't have that in America, especially if you are an individual of modest means. And I see this also as having worked previously in the offices of public defenders, offices around, in Louisiana and now in Maryland. In Maryland, though, Maryland has actually a great system, and the threshold to be able to be represented by a public defender is higher than most in terms of the poverty level that you must show. But regardless of that, even if you do get public representation, because of the colleagues that and then they're wonderful lawyers, they're saturated. They're at capacity constantly. So that representation isn't going to be, it's not going to be this. There isn't enough time and resources to adequately represent that defendant. Now, when it comes to, in the wake of Floyd and, having been in Maryland now over a dozen years, we have seen, a crises between the relations between the police and our Black communities of color, and in Baltimore City, we saw that, with a number of individuals who also, had a little bit of media attention. And so in the legislature, as early as 2014, when I was on the House Judiciary Committee, we started legislating in the areas of police reform and changing that culture and grappling the racism that exists within our criminal justice system. And what I wouldn't like to see happen is that we continue to fall into the trap of singling out an enemy as if it were just the police. There are a number of reforms that we have to go into in terms of diversifying the bench, diversifying those of us that are practicing as attorneys. I can tell you, as a former elected, and I walk into the courts today and they simply don't know what to do with me. They don't know if I'm the interpreter, if I'm there on protect as a probation officer, but it's never that I'm never the attorney, right? And so we have to really, those of us that are in the international human rights realm, incentivize peoples of all backgrounds, especially in America, to pursue a career in public service, in international human rights law, in the nonprofit sector, diversifying those spaces so that we can become more, even on the domestic front, bring these international conversations into these organizations within civil society. There has to be a stark change in the culture in America where we bow our heads down and we become more humble and start to really talk about the fact that we don't have the answers to everything. And it's a really huge it's a huge feat to even begin, because even as an attorney, and my training, I got my legal degree at the University of Maryland School of Law, one of the most progressive law schools in the DC metropolitan area. And, some of the professors, even if I were to bring up any kind of international conversation to, let's see, any area, so torts or contracts, it's almost like we're speaking two different languages. And what I try to always talk about with my clients, I'm also an immigration attorney, so speaking to Article 14 of the Declaration, we have every individual has a right to seek asylum and protection in any country. And so as we see Congress bringing in international law into the statutes, we see a lack of respect for the international jurisprudence in our statutes. It's not taken as seriously. So Congress pretty much just, says, okay, we have to abide by this convention. Let's just put it in. There's no real thought process. And really it's because there's a lack of expertise even within Congress or counsel to Congress to really be intentional about how you implement, what America is signing on to when it comes to these international treaties and abiding by, just agreements and understandings around the globe. But I can go on and on. I wanted to address, and then obviously the right to education. So I'll finish with this point. I'd much rather hear from those of you that are listening in and keeping this kind of two-way conversation. The right to education. So I was born in this country, and having learned the language through the public school system at a very early age, I became very aware that for some reason I had a debt to the school system. Why is it that the government should care about my language acquisition? And there's a lot of people that don't understand that, international law and our international human rights treaties give us that entitlement that every child deserves adequate education. And the average American, if you speak to them, they don't start from a fundamental conversation of we're all treated equally. They will tell you, somebody who doesn't understand how immigration works, especially because immigration is broken in this country, they will tell you, why don't you just become legal? Why don't you just legalize yourself? As if there's some kind of administrative building where you just go and fill out some documentations, right? And so as a daughter of immigrants, somebody who did not speak the language at the time, and I already have a privilege, right? I acknowledge my privileges as much as my disadvantages. I had a privilege in that I was a U.S. citizen, but we have a responsibility and an opportunity to welcome the youth that we're receiving from Central America. In this area in Montgomery County, we are second to the city of Houston in the numbers that we receive in terms of the unaccompanied minors that are coming from Central America. And now at the local level, which brings me now, I'm actually now running for a county seat in the county legislature, which is the county council. And again, because I have that international human rights law perspective, that's the kind of the basis from where I'm working on. But I'm telling you that frame of thought is an exception and not the rule. And so if we want to really want to address the lack of education around human rights, then we need to make sure that the people in power have that sensitivity and understand that we don't have all the answers as Americans, and we need to look at other institutions, whether it be the United Nations or the different international human rights courts, be it the Inter-American Court of Human Rights or the European Court of Human Rights or the African Court of Human Rights, and the ICJ, the International Court of Justice, to make sure that America is living up to what we say, our democratic values and our love for humanity. So I really thank you for the invitation today, and I welcome your thoughts and your questions.
Attorney Morales, it was such a great pleasure to hear you speaking from these two ambivalent perspective, because it's kind of unique. So for those of you, obviously Ms. Morales is going to stay for the Q&A section towards the end after Dr. Amari is also speaking. But I want to let you all know that Ms. Morales also, she's going to be a guest in tonight's breakout session, which is going to be entirely in Spanish. So for those of you who are Spanish speakers, si hablan español, por favor, también únese a nosotros en la sesión que está de breakout en las 7 de la noche, porque Ms. Morales va a estar allá también. Thank you, Ms. Morales. I just made an introduction for those who do not speak Spanish, for the Spanish-speaking audience here to join us also and continue to listen to Ms. Morales and Attorney Morales' work in the Spanish session, which is a section, a breakout session dedicated particularly to that. So without further ado, let me go, because we are advancing with the program. But isn't this amazing what the perspective? I'm always getting amazed with the different perspectives, the different viewpoints that you can see out there, not only from a practitioner point of view, because I've been working in the field of human rights for so many years now, but also every day we need to overcome challenges like this. Every day we have to talk about human rights, because human rights have become such an important aspect of our everyday society. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our next speaker for this human rights education panel, which is Dr. Chaima Amari. Over the past 8 years, Dr. Amari has held numerous positions in governments as well as in the private sectors and with different nonprofit NGOs. She served also as the advisor for a permanent mission to the United Nations in New York, and served at the International Federation for Peace and Sustainable Development at the UN, and was appointed as a women's editor by the Society and Diplomatic Review. Dr. Amari organized many United Nations side events, raising awareness on issues such as women empowerment, interfaith dialogue, youth leadership, human rights, human trafficking, and protecting cultural heritage in conflict zones, with different ambassadors, working with different UN officials and head of state. So we are welcoming Dr. Amari's expertise and knowledge to tell us a bit more about how is it to work at an international level throughout these so many officials, and what is the impact that you can create as a regular citizen working with this high-level officials. So, Dr. Amari, you have the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. Thank you to all the powerful panelists and everyone who is joining us today. And thank you for this question. Actually, my speak is gonna be like more a diplomatic speech coming from the United Nations background and not any special work for any organization or a government. I would like maybe to start pointing out the current situation of international human rights violation during COVID-19 pandemic. Unfortunately, like previous pandemics, we have seen that COVID-19 has led to a vast range of human rights violation around the world. Many groups today have found themselves especially exposed to abuse, stigma, violence and discrimination, along with losing access to schools and proper education, lack of access to information, and especially inequality around access to quality human rights educations. So it's important to say that human rights education is a fundamental human right, and commitments to human rights are also commitment to human rights education. All we need today is a culture where human rights are learned, lived, and acted for. Human rights education is not only a moral right, but also a legal right under international law. Article 26 of the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that everyone has the right to education and that education shall be directed to the full development of the human personality and to the strengthening of respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. It shall promote understanding, tolerance, and friendship among nations, racial, or religious groups, and shall further the activity of the United Nations for the maintenance of peace. So the United Nations has an irreplaceable role to play with regard to human rights education in the world. The World Conference of Human Rights on Human Rights held in Vienna in 1993 reaffirmed the essential role of human rights education, training, and public information in the promoting of human rights. In 1994, the United Nations Decade for Human Rights Education was proclaimed by the General Assembly, spanning the period of January 1st, 1995 to December 31st, 2004. So I would like to say here that human rights education and training is a tool for a peaceful societal transformation with a gender perspective and a framework for social development. It aims at all empowerment and the building of capabilities of women, men, youth, and children through critical thinking, understanding, applying, and claiming all human rights, including civil and political, economic, social, and cultural rights, and the right to development. That is why every target audience must not only be provided with more than a general understanding of what human rights is. Everyone must also be shown how human rights are relevant to them and how they can apply them in their life, in their work. It's therefore my hope today that this summit will not only focus on what is being done by organizations, but just as much on the efforts undertaken by governments themselves and how the international community can support these efforts in a sustainable way. Integrating human rights education into the official education system also help preventing a situation where human rights education remains subject to the goodwill of international organizations or local NGOs. However, teaching human rights in schools cannot be done in a vacuum. If principles of democracy, human rights, and tolerance are ill-defined and not understood in popular culture, it will be difficult or even impossible to have any major impacts. So I would like to say that in close by a quote of Kofi Annan saying, human rights education is much more than a lesson in schools or a theme for a day. It is a process to equip people with the tools they need to live lives of security and dignity. On this Human Rights Summit, let us continue to work together to develop and nurture in future generations a culture of human rights to promote freedom, security, and peace in all nations. Thank you.
Dr. Amari, it was such a great pleasure to hear you speaking. Thank you for sharing some nuggets of knowledge and some of your expertise in working as such big forums and international, with international covenants, with a high-level official. It's definitely, and I think you brought some amazing points, which is going to allow me to reach into our final wrap-up of this panel. First and foremost, I want to thank each and every one of our distinguished guests and panelists. And I've been watching the comment section, and I know all of you agree with me that we definitely were able to bring together at this same table. I'm so grateful. So many specialists on a variety of different topics. We heard about the right to health, the right to life. We heard about human rights education in schools. We heard about immigration issues. We heard about reforms in the justice system. So I think we have some things to wrap our minds around it to go ahead. So what I would like to do right now, there are a couple of questions. We will need to drive through the questions very, very fast because the next panel of the day, it's about to start. So we want to make sure the religious freedom panelists will also be joining. But meanwhile, just let's just take some questions from the public. My team here send me a couple of them, and the first one that I want to address, it's actually it's not for our panelists, but I think it bridges well to the question of how can civil society organizations and regular citizens address this lack of education about human rights. And we heard from each one of the speakers today, from their viewpoint, how they did it with their civil society organization or as private citizens address the lack of education about human rights. One of the questions that somebody's asking, it's addressed directly to USIDHR, and it's asking whether Isabelle gave an excellent analysis about the global challenge of children education and mentions some of the countries in which USIDHR has, a footprint into. But I was surprised to see that Nigeria, it's not mentioned, while the UNICEF reports that 1 out of every 5 out-of-school children in the world is in Nigeria. And the question reads, does USIDHR know about the child education crisis in Nigeria? And how is it planning to come alongside with us? I'm in Nigeria, but I live in the United States. Very good question from Adele Tadi. I want to address that because if you hear me speaking in the beginning of the conference about, and I give example of a couple of different countries. So the way it works with our humanitarian Edu for Every Child program, where we basically help children go to school in different countries, we partner with different organizations and institutions in those specific countries to be able to help and identify the kids who are the most in need on the ground. So I didn't want to provide an exhaustive list of countries in which USIDHR has been working, but Nigeria, it is one of them, and we are aware of the issues and the fact that Nigeria is the first country in the world that has like the largest problem in terms of like the scarcity of children being able to go to school. So we do have a human rights consultants such as Frank Bell, Lambert, Adebukola, and Sean, and plus many others who we've personally trained, and I personally trained in human rights consulting, so that they can go out there in Nigeria in their communities to teach others about human rights, to teach others about education of human rights. So and plus we do have like other volunteers. So just wanted to kind of like get to that question, because I feel it's very, very important for everyone here in our audience watching us from all over the world. I see the Democratic Republic of Congo. I saw Benin. I saw, Washington, D.C. I saw Canada. I saw Liberia. I saw Nigeria. I saw so many countries. And we are so amazingly grateful for having you all here. So one of the other questions that was addressed was specifically addressed to Mr. Dold, who Edwin Martinez, he asked whether you have any idea roughly how many children are currently serving life sentences in the United States, or how many of them are at least are in isolated confinement, because you brought that issue into your speech, if you have that data.
Yeah, it's a really great question, and it depends on how we define life sentence, right? So, if we're talking about kids who've been sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, which is the provision that I referenced in Article 37 of the CRC, it's roughly now just around 1,000 that we're aware of, right? In 2012, the U.S. Supreme Court, in a case called Miller v. Alabama, struck down the use of mandatory life without parole. That case was made retroactive in a subsequent case called Montgomery v. Louisiana, which involved a 16-year-old, a 17-year-old rather, by the name of Henry Montgomery in Louisiana, which for purposes of, I know we often talk like about all the bad things that happen from a human rights perspective. One positive thing, Mr. Montgomery, who had served over 57 years in prison and had been serving a life without parole sentence, walked out of prison yesterday at Angola, which is one of the worst prisons in the United States in southern Louisiana. So that was a little of a bright spot that happened yesterday for Mr. Montgomery, the namesake of that decision that impacted more than 2,500 people across the country. Now, when we step back and we talk about the broader number of kids that are serving life sentences with the possibility of parole, that number actually creeps closer to about 10,000, give or take. And those, and sometimes those can be what we term de facto life without parole. Like in Maryland, for example, they haven't had really a functioning parole board for many, many years now, dating back to the 1990s. The governor back then said that if you have life, it means life, and I'm never going to grant anybody parole, right? And that was a policy that was continued through both Republican and Democratic administrations up until more recent times, right? So, so we have seen this dynamic where kids who even should have the possibility of being released actually don't get that opportunity. So there's about 10,000 of those children. Now, there's another population as well, right? Which is what we term de facto life without parole. And these are kids who are serving lengthy prison sentences that are so long that they might as well be life without parole, right? So these are kids who have 40, 50, 60, 70, 80. I was looking at data the other day. Somebody has a 1,000-year sentence in South Carolina. Well, they'll never have the opportunity to get out. And so those children are not captured in the raw data that when we talk about life without parole sentences. And so there's still an effort going underway right now in the country. One of the things that we're doing as an organization is collecting for the first time data from around the United States to actually put a raw number on the total people who are currently incarcerated in our adult jails and prisons for crimes that they committed as children. To give you sort of a rough estimate, between 4 states alone, Texas, Louisiana, South Carolina, and North Carolina, just in those 4 states, we've identified at least 10,000 people who are currently incarcerated for crimes that they committed as children. So when I say that this is the largest government-sanctioned human rights abuse against children in the world today, I'm looking at the numbers. I'm looking at the egregious nature of the human rights violations and the complete disregard for these protections that are outlined in the CRC and ICCPR.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Dold, for sharing that with us. It's absolutely terrifying to hear the thought that so many children in the United States are in jail currently, or are serving a life sentence or life without parole. So thank you for your input on that. We have so many questions from the audience, and the panelists here are also going to be able to answer some of you in particular once we are getting down, because unfortunately we need to move further with our next panel of the day, which is the one on religious freedom. But I think we all got so much knowledge, so much information and new skills under our belt to help us succeed and kind of get some pinpoints. To wrap this session up, I just want to mention, because some of the question addressed Mr. Ahmad, who particularly asked where is Global Peace Chain located and how they can join. So Global Peace Chain is an organization based in the United States. However, Mr. Ahmad travels around the globe scouting and identifying these young leaders. So definitely he's he's one of our partners at USIDHR for the Edu for Every Child program in Pakistan, together with which we were able to help 200 kids go to school just this year. I want to thank you so much for all of you for joining us today. Unfortunately, we need to wrap it up because we have to transition to the next section of the day, which is the panel on religious freedom. Thank you, Attorney Morales. Thank you, Dr. Amari. Thank you, Mr. Ahmad, Mr. Dold. I really appreciate your input today. Appreciate your joining and answered positive to be part of the first day of Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit. I thank you all. So have a nice day. Thank you.
Thank you, Isabelle.
So quickly, we are moving forward with our next session of the day. We have some important and amazing guest speakers coming for the Religious Freedom Roundtable panel of discussion, we are going to call it. This panel discussion is going to be moderated by our president, Mr. Manuel Wancha. Manuel Wancha has been a strategic advisor for more than 20 years to respected entrepreneurs, influential people, and top Forbes companies like Motorola, Ford, GM, and General Electric. He's recognized for his outstanding leadership and experience in international business strategies while serving as the president of one of the largest networks of chambers of commerce, the International Union of Bilateral Chambers of Commerce and Industry. Mr. Wancha engaged in dialogue and collaborated with President Obama, the Trump administration, and high-level foreign diplomats working on strengthening the relationships among diplomatic, government, and corporate leaders. In 2015, he received the IUB-CCI Star and Merit Award for Economic Diplomacy in recognition of the outstanding contribution in promoting bilateral economic diplomacy. He is currently serving as the president of our organization, U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, overseeing our operations in over 26 countries. It is now my pleasure to introduce and allow him to share more about the next panel of discussion on religious freedom, Mr. Manuel Wancha, President of U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. Manuel?
Hi, Isabel. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, for the great introduction. Is my honor and pleasure, today, to be here, and good afternoon, distinguished guests and participants watching us from over the world. And again, it's my pleasure to be here with you today and host the next session of the Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit 2021 on the subject of religious freedom and Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which I quote, "Everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religions. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in the community with others and in the public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in the teaching, practice, worship, and observance." I remember in 2019, I had an aha moment. It's true. While hosting the Commercial Diplomats Club here in Washington, D.C., I had the opportunity to invite a special guest, Mr. Greg Mitchell, who is the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable. And he pointed out that prosperity or investments will not happen in a country that does not uphold basic human rights and religious freedom for all faiths. That made me realize that the business world cannot function without allowing religious pluralism and giving people the right to express and practice their own faith. As president of USIDHR and leader of several other international organizations, I immediately had to go all in promoting the importance of the religious freedom everywhere. In 2019, I took the lead and became the US partner and co-chair for the IRF Roundtable Romania, being part of IRF Roundtable's World Network and the first of the Eastern Europe region. My commitment doesn't stop here. One of the core educational programs of USIDHR is focused on religious pluralism. We create this program to address issues of religious discriminations, hatred, and intolerance. We bring together experts and analysts to discuss the status of religious freedom in the world and provide the knowledge and expertise to come up with solutions to combat religious discrimination. Without taking more of your time, I would like to introduce you to our panelists for today's session and allow them to share more about the importance of religious freedom. Okay, it's my honor to invite the Honorable Nadine Menza, Chair, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USIDHR. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Greg Mitchell, Co-Chair, International Religious Freedom Roundtable. Welcome. Mr. Shriman Singh Stulnagel, Co-Chair, IRF Secretariat, and Mr. Bishop, Dr. Paul Murray, Co-Chair, IRF Secretariat.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, man.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Yes, I know we. It's a pleasure to have you here, and it's an honor. I will give each panelist 5 to 7 minutes to discuss their work in relation to the topic of the session, and I will introduce each of you. And at the end, we will engage in conversation on religious freedom and answer some questions from the public. Is that okay with you?
That's great.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce the first panelist, the Honorable Nadine Menza, Chair, United States Commission on International Religious Freedom, USIDHR. The Honorable Nadine Menza is a noted speaker, writer, and policy expert with more than 2 decades of experience as an advocate for working families and a champion for international religious freedom. In May of 2020, she was reappointed by the White House to a second 2-year term on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, serving as a vice chair in 2019 and chair in June 2021. She has represented USIDHR in delegation to Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Myanmar, Bahrain, Indonesia, Iraq, Azerbaijan, Thailand, Taiwan, and Uzbekistan. She was traveling in her own personal capacity to better understand religious freedom conditions in Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, and Bangladesh, as well as the recently spending a month in northern Syria. She's more honored to have met with persecuted communities of various faiths from around the world. Is my pleasure and honor to have you, Honorable, and you have the floor.
Thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. I'm so honored to represent the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, or USIDHR, where I'm able to serve as chair this year. And I'd like to thank you, the Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, for hosting this summit, and of course for my esteemed panelists. Today, I'd like to highlight the value of promoting international religious freedom, share a brief history of USIDHR and other institutions and tools that promote freedom of religion or belief in foreign policy, and explain how we use international human rights standards, especially Article 18, which, as you heard, is so beautiful, of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in our work. Religious freedom is under serious and sustained pressure from much of the globe, from Afghanistan to China, from Iraq to Sudan, Nigeria, Vietnam, Russia to Turkey, promoting and protecting this fundamental right has never been more challenging. But at the same time, protecting this right has never been more important. Because religious freedom is so central to human identities, studies show that societal well-being suffers when it is unprotected. Politically, religious freedom abuses are linked with the absence of democracy and the presence of abuses of other human rights, such as freedom of expression, association, and assembly. Religion can be a driver of dangerous conflict, and peace and security suffers whenever religious freedom is abused. There's also an association between a lack of religious freedom and the presence of violent religious extremism. Economically, religious persecution can destabilize communities and further marginalize the persecuted. Recognizing the vital importance of the freedom of religion or belief, Congress passed the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998, also known as IRFA. This law was enacted to elevate religious freedom to be a higher priority in U.S. policy. It explicitly provides that the U.S. policy include condemnation of violations of religious freedom and assists other governments in the promotion of this important right. To this aim, the law created a range of U.S. government tools to implement this policy. It created government institutions to focus on freedom of religion or belief abroad, which includes USIDHR, then also the Ambassador at Large for International Religious Freedom at the State Department. IRFA also requires monitoring and reporting on religious freedom violations and established consequences for the worst violators. These consequences include the State Department's Country of Particular Concern, or the CPC list, and the Special Watch List, designations for governments that engage in or tolerate particularly severe or severe violations of religious freedom. Within this framework of IRFA, USIDHR was created as an independent, bipartisan U.S. government body to unflinchingly monitor religious freedom conditions worldwide, laser focused on religious freedom, using international standards as a guidepost, and to make recommendations for U.S. policy. To fulfill this mandate, USIDHR has 9 commissioners appointed by the president and the congressional leadership of both political parties. USIDHR commissioners are private citizens, each appointed for a 2-year term and eligible for a second 2-year term. We come from different political parties, different faith and professional backgrounds, in different parts of the country, yet we all agree, regardless of our background or political positions, that religious freedom is important for everyone, everywhere, and we need to shine a light on the severe abuses that so many individuals of all faiths or of none suffer for exercising their right to religious freedom. USIDHR calls out religious freedom violations and issues our findings and recommendations for U.S. policy through press releases, op-eds, reports throughout the year, and our annual report each spring. Our annual report covers around 25 countries, typically those with severe violations. USIDHR is able to engage on these issues globally because we use that international standard to monitor religious freedom violations. We are not pushing an American standard or an American notion of these values, but instead our work is tethered to that, as you heard, Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and other international human rights treaties. For example, USIDHR advocates for the repeal of blasphemy laws worldwide, as these laws violate the freedom of religion or belief as enshrined in international human rights treaties. Religious freedom includes the right to express a full range of thoughts and beliefs, including those that others might find blasphemous. Laws prohibiting blasphemy, by definition, place limits on speech and impede free expression over discourse concerning religion. Further, these laws aim to protect religions, but human rights laws protect individual believers, not beliefs. In some countries, such as Pakistan, blasphemy laws aim to support the majority religion in a way that is impermissible, in that it discriminates against other groups. Pursuant to international standards, USIDHR also advocates for the freedom of religion or belief for all. We stand with those of all faiths or no faith at all, as it is rarely, if ever, the case that just one religious group is persecuted in a given country or area. It is essential to our work that we speak out against any abuse of freedom of religion or belief. To that aim, USIDHR has 2 projects that shine a light on diverse victims of religious persecution: the Freedom of Religion or Beliefs Victims List and our Religious Freedom of Conscience project. These projects provide faces of the victims in these countries that we're reporting on and tell their stories with the hope of improving the situation and drawing attention to religious freedom conditions around the globe. We recognize in our work that human rights norms are universal, indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated, which has allowed us to be on the cutting edge of religious freedom issues and push the U.S. government and others to consider the intersection of religious freedom with other rights. For example, USIDHR started an international conversation on how women's rights and religious freedom are complementary. In 2017, recognizing that there was an entrenched misperception that women's rights to equality and religious freedom are clashing rights, we looked more deeply into the complexities and synergies between the rights of women and girls and religious freedom to help dispel that misperception. With that brief overview of our work and the importance of international standards in our advocacy for freedom of religion or belief, let me offer you a sincere thanks for coming and being interested in this important topic. And I'm looking forward to hearing my colleagues and further answering questions and having a discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Your Honor. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again for being with us. And right now, give me the opportunity to introduce Greg Mitchell. Mr. Greg Mitchell has been in politics and government since 1991 and served as Chief of Staff of the Congress James Rogan from California. He now runs his own government relations firm and is the co-chair of the International Religious Freedom Roundtable, an informal group of individuals from all faith and none who work together to improve religion-related policy and advance religious freedom for everyone, everywhere. The IRF Roundtable is a proven platform for increasing mutual understanding, respect, trust, and reliance. Mr. Greg Mitchell is leading the establishment of a global network of such multi-faith religious freedom policy roundtables that will coordinate his action with those of a growing global alliance of governments, civil society, organizations, and faith communities working together to advance religious freedom for all. To increase public safety and secure your rights and freedom, Mr. Greg Mitchell has been working on meaningful criminal justice reform since 2003. Most recently, he worked with the informal group of former federal prosecutors and senior government officials to get federal criminal justice reform legislation passed into law. First Step Act, he worked, with President administration with President George W. Bush, President Obama, and also recently, and this is very important, the First Step Act of 2018 became public law. On December 21, 2018, Greg Mitchell was in the Oval Office when President Donald J. Trump signed the bill into law. To get this bill to the president's desk, he worked to get the involving version passed through the House and the Senate. And, I think will be hours and days, to talk about Mr. Greg Mitchell. It's an honor and privilege. Greg, for further ado, you have the floor. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks, Manuel and Isabelle and everybody at the Institute and all the organizers of the summit here. And thanks to my fellow panelists. This really is a religious freedom team that you've got here speaking on the panel. And we're so blessed to have Nadine Mayenza as chair of USIDHR. She's just been such a fantastic partner to everybody in civil society, and really putting some pressure on governments to do the right thing and really secure religious freedom for everyone. And Article 18 is the glue that holds all of us together. And I want to, also honored to be on with Paul Murray and Simran Singh Stupnagel, because they're part of my team at the International Religious Freedom Secretariat as well. And like Manny said, we're building a global network of these religious freedom roundtables all around the world. And I'll kind of describe that a little bit, here as I go. But like Chair Mayenza said, international religious freedom is in a state of deepening crisis. And the reason we're doing these roundtables is because traditional advocacy, which is like each faith or belief community advocating for its own, with a focus on naming, blaming, and shaming its persecutors, by itself, that's not enough. It's clear. Like Chair Mayenza said, we have the International Religious Freedom Act that was passed in 1998. We've had more than 20 years now of an IRF office, an ambassador, USIDHR, the annual reports, but things have still gotten worse. So something more is needed. The global movement needs new approaches, and that's what we're working on with these roundtables and with the IRF Secretariat. And what we're doing is, we're putting an incredibly positive focus on, bringing people of all faiths and beliefs together into these roundtables. But we're also doing summits now, which I'll tell you about. But we're bringing everyone together and facilitating the sharing of all their stories of persecution and discrimination. And then we're uniting people into multi-faith coalitions to really confront and address all these instances of persecution and discrimination around the world, even genocide. And we're coordinating multi-faith actions to not only advocate for each other, and build religious freedom. But the practical results of this work is that we're creating mutual respect, trust, and reliance across deep religious differences, across our deepest differences. And it really is possible, to bring people of all faiths together and get them working together, get them standing up for each other and advocating for each other. And that's what, the more we do that, the more they come together, the more they understand each other and respect each other, which is what this is built on. It's not tolerance, it's respect. That's the starting point. But then the more they all work together and stand up for each other in multi-faith fashion, it builds even stronger than respect and goes to mutual trust and reliance, even love across religious differences. That's what makes this unique, and we need more of this. We still need traditional advocacy in the annual reports from the State Department and the U.S. Commission, but we really need to start focusing on bringing everyone together and getting everyone to stand up for each other in multi-faith fashion. And so that's what you're going to hear a little bit from Paul and Simran also. But that's the project we're working on now, to build this global network. And real quick, the purpose of the new project that we're just launching now is basically to conceptualize and institutionalize a new approach that's centered on cooperative engagement. That's what we call it, and we get that from Templeton Religion Trust. They're our major funder. But cooperative engagement is getting each faith community to engage each other in a way where everybody is respecting and protecting the other's human dignity and liberty of conscience. So you're engaging each other while respecting their human dignity and liberty of conscience. And then we're also going to get into strategic planning, and which will allow for alignment and coordination of actions, across the bottom up of civil society and the top down of governments. And we have categories we have three major categories of activities that we're working on. One is global events. We're going to be helping to convene religious freedom summits all around the world. We had the first global summit that civil society led in Washington, D.C. in July. That's an annual global summit now, but we're going to be helping to coordinate regional and national summits all around the world. So if anybody's watching and they're interested in helping to organize a regional or national religious freedom summit in your country, you can reach out to us through Manuel and Isabelle. But then the whole point of those summits is to convene and catalyze the movement in that area and get more people into the global movement through these religious freedom roundtables, which are multi-faith. They're inclusive of all faiths and none, and we run on an equal citizenship model. Like everybody has a seat at that table. Everybody has an equal opportunity to speak, to tell their story, and then to launch multi-faith initiatives and invite everybody else to opt in. And everybody has an equal opportunity to opt in, because again, that's the point, getting everybody together and get them all standing up for each other. And then the third major category, like I said, is that global leadership and coordination element, where we're going to have a global leadership council that provides high-level strategic planning that can then be shared with everybody in the network, so that we're coordinating actions that actually are channeling all the passions and efforts of all the stakeholders, all the faith communities around the world, even parliamentarians and governments, but channeling them towards successful outcomes that increase unity among people of all faiths and beliefs, and again, build that mutual trust and reliance. And we really want to build religious freedom, inclusion, and cohesion. We believe that's the game changer, and that's how we're going to reverse the trends from the last 20 years of rising restrictions and rising social hostilities against religion. We want to start bringing that number down, and we believe this is how we're going to do it. So, in a nutshell, that's what we're doing, and look forward to answering any questions if we have time. So thank you so much again, everybody at the Institute.
Yes, Abel. Yes, thank you so much, Mr. Greg Mitchell. Yes, we are here. It's like a International Religious Freedom group. We have the Honorable Nadim Mamenza, from U.S. government, working with civil society and embrace that, and that is the efficiency, you know, what we are doing here in Washington, D.C. And we want to express that to the world, you know, because when it's not only to work from the bottom up, from civil society to the government, also the government, you know, give you the hand, you know, to try and understand how can help, how can support, and how also to understand civil society, how to work together and have the better communication and create this kind of a good relationship between, and be a partner for with the same goal, and to achieve the same impact. And before thank you so much. Before I'll come back to you, let me introduce Mr. Sriman Singh Stulbeneg is the Corporate Strategy Executive and Human Rights Advocate. He's the fourth Secretary for Singh Dharma. Mr. Sriman was a Senior Vice President in Account Global, the largest employer of retired American police officers in the world. Mr. Sriman was the Chief Communication Officer and the Executive Vice President for the Alzheimer's Research and Prevention Foundation, where he remained a Senior Advisor. He was also a managing consulting at the Grasper Global Strategies of a government relations firm. He was held a variety of board positions as a board member of Treasury and a Singh American Legal Defense and Education Fund, board member in the International Campaign for the Rihanna, and a former board member of the Nobel Peace Prize nominated Institute of the Region and Public Policy. Mr. Sriman is currently a fellow of the Royal Society of Arts in London and nominated as senior fellow at the Dietrich Bonhoeffer Institute in DC. He also spoke on religion security and human rights issues around the world, and was named by Secretary Clinton as a member of the State Department's Strategic Dialogue with Civil Society. Welcome, Mr. Sriman. It's a pleasure to have you. You have the floor.
Thank you, Manuel. Thank you, everybody, especially the other panelists. This really is an incredible team that tries to address religious freedom wherever we can. I really want to commend the Institute on Democracy and Human Rights for bringing religious freedom to this summit. It is the fundamental human right, because what's inside of us, what we think and what we feel and what we believe in relationship to our faith, is sacred. It's sacred even if we don't believe anything, even if we're searching and we don't know what there is, or if we're not searching, if we just want to have internal peace. Which one of us does not want to have internal peace? And so it is an unassailable right. And as soon as it goes, as soon as we allow society to infringe on what people believe and what they're allowed to believe, and what relationships with whatever they consider sacred they can hold inside of them, if we infringe on it, then the other rights go. Women's rights go next. We know that religious persecution, or persecution of any religious group by a large religion that's in charge, or a government that has picked a religion, it means that women do a lot worse in those countries or regions. The environment actually does worse when there isn't freedom of conscience. If you trace the progression of rights, eventually the rivers are dirtier. I worked at the largest employer of retired American police officers in the world, and we know that if you don't have freedom of conscience protected in your society, the judiciary stops being impartial. It stops protecting each individual as sacred and their rights as sacred, and then it is tempted by corruption. And then the police force goes from being an entity that serves and protects the people to being an organized crime unit itself. So we at the IRF Secretariat, we look at this and we say, every person needs to be protected. Their freedom of conscience needs to be protected, because it leads to national security, and it leads to a functioning society where atheists can thrive. Everybody gets to thrive. I want to say, as a Sikh, we're the 5th largest religion in the world. Many don't know us because we're like, if you have 2 billion Christians and billion Muslims and 1 billion Hindus and 400 million Buddhists. Then next you have about 25, 30 million Sikhs. So we're much smaller than the other religions, but all of these faiths in different places around the world are discriminated against in unthinkable ways, and also discriminate against people. You have Buddhists discriminating against Muslims, you have Muslims discriminating against Hindus, you have Hindus discriminating against Muslims, you have Sikhs that are a minority in every country in the world. And what we found is that this kind of, and then there are the much smaller groups. What we found is that if each group advocates for itself and complains about its own pain, you do get compassion from people. If you have some political influence, you get some compassion from elected leaders who will be possibly from the discriminating group. But people kind of get tired because there's so much discrimination going on that if we talk about our own pain, then people go, we're so sorry this is happening to you. Next. And since the 60s, the studies show that discrimination is actually getting much, much worse. It's significantly impacting over 80% of the population on this planet. So our attempt at the roundtable is to stand shoulder to shoulder with one another. So if something happens to a Christian in North Africa, then it's the Sikhs' jobs, it's the Muslims' jobs, it's the Buddhist jobs, it's the atheist jobs, in my opinion, to go there as Nadine has, and stand with the people who are being harmed. It is much more gratifying to protect others. Even my own, I have 2 daughters. When I talk about problems for Sikhs, they look very tired. When I talk about it's our job to protect everybody, whether it's on their playground at school or whether it's around the world, it's our job to protect everybody. Their eyes light up. The eyes in our congregations light up when we talk about our duty to defend the freedom of others. I'll leave you with one small fact about Sikhs. We wear a knife everywhere we go. Now, it used to be a big sword back 300-400 years ago. Today, it's a ceremonial knife. I always have one around my neck. Today, I happen to have one, my ceremonial one that I'm carrying on my wrist to remind me of our duty to be ready to protect the freedom of each and every person. And as we said, as was the slogan at our recent Religious Freedom Summit, religious freedom is for everyone, everywhere, all the time. And please join us at the roundtable. Please pay very close attention to what the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom is putting out. Their slogan is to be unflinching. There's always political interest when we decide who we call out and who we don't call out. And I really want to commend USIDHR for, as diplomats, to hold the line that their job is to monitor this issue around the planet in an unflinching way. And may we all be unflinching, and maybe all be courageous to address this issue together. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Mr. Simran. Emotional and touching words. Because yes, it's true. We are born unequal. And that. With no further ado, let me introduce Bishop Dr. Paul Murray. Has been in Christian leadership for more than 25 years, and he is the senior pastor of the Lighthouse Church in Millersville, Maryland. He is award-winning author of Broke, Picking Up the Pieces After the Fall, and soon to be published First to Serve. Dr. Murray serves as the Vice President of Religious Freedom Initiatives with the Global Peace Foundation and Vice Chairman of the International Religious Freedom Secretariat. A passionate advocate for religious freedom and human rights, Dr. Murray is a regular presenter on international programs panels and a conference speaker addressing international religious challenges on international and domestic religious liberty violations. He also served as an executive board member of the First Amendment Voice Alliance, member of the Committee on Religious Liberty, and the co-chair Capital Area Coalition on Religious Liberty. Dr. Murray holds a doctorate in pastoral leadership from Howard University School of Divinity and pastoral counseling and theology from Liberty Baptist Theological Seminars, along with a Bachelor of Science in Healthcare Studies from University of Phoenix. Thank you so much, Dr. Murray, for having you, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Appreciate being a part of this today. And again, to our panelists, thank you very much. Appreciate all you've had to say. And Simran, I'm glad you're holding that sword for all of us. As we listen to the conversations today, I think one of the things that we have to really acknowledge is this fundamental truth that we are all one in humanity. And when we can take that as the premise in all the work that we're doing, what we see USIDHR doing, which is very powerful, the work that Greg Mitchell is leading with the Earth Secretariat and the Earth Roundtables, it really speaks to this inclusiveness to bring people together. And when we recognize this fundamental truth and we build upon it, then the many challenges and the conflicts between people of diverse faiths or no faith at all can really dissolve into a people who are bound together by common universal principles. You know, I've often wondered why we as individuals and even as communities that we so easily acquiesce control over our very basic human rights and freedoms to man-made governments and institutions who in turn dictate and enforce ideologies that we often find are contrary to what we may believe or hold to individually. This freedom of thought that we each have is endowed by a transcendent, principled creator. Yet in my questioning this, I've come to the revelation that really the greatest obstacle, really the most troubling problems and challenges for people of faith and conscience or no faith at all are not the governments or human institutions. Rather, it's each of us. We, a people who hold to our own very own individual or shared values of belief and faith. That's where the challenge is, you see, because we seek to push one belief as superior to another. We spend millions to gather people together with a purpose to conform them to a particular religion or belief through the process of denouncing the belief or faith of another. You know, we challenge and we rebuke the theologies that are not in alignment with our own and with our very own organized power and influence. We use these very same governments and institutions to oppress another minority religion and justify these very actions, or we simply turn a blind eye to it. You know, as a result, human history is paved with a trail of tears for the lives of the many who have been oppressed, persecuted, and even killed because of their faith or belief. And sadly, the future before us has yet to accept this new blueprint that a diverse people of multiple faiths, beliefs, or conscience can engage in the public square and build a moral society upon the common transcendent principles that are foundational to each of our communities of faith, belief, and conscience. You know, this convening, this summit that you hold it today really highlights where we are as a people. As each of our panelists have spoken and shared from their experiences and their expertise, I believe we all can agree that we stand at a crossroads today. Just yesterday, I saw how USIDHR put out a press release regarding this current administration in the United States removing Nigeria as a country of concern. And when we see all that is happening there, a country that is 50% Christian almost, and almost 50% Muslim, yet there is a genocide taking place there that we cannot turn a blind eye to. Whether it does not matter what faith you are or no faith at all. What matters is the issue that humanity, individuals are being killed because of their belief or their lack to be controlled by another faith, religious, or group. You know, and as long as we see that there's a choice before us, I know that there is hope. The Earth Secretariat, the Earth Roundtables really brings that together because we are able to really bring people of all diverse backgrounds together and faiths and no faiths to sit at a common table that is a safe place for everyone to come together, address their issues and their problems, and then seek ways to take care of those issues. I think one of the other challenging things that we have right now across the world is that when we speak about religious freedom, that definition is always always trying to move us into a place that we're not really comfortable with. When I think about the different communities that come together, when we sit together at that common table, we know that we're protected, and we can speak to the issues of protecting the life of one another. And when we look at the different countries that we deal with around the world, every country, the definition of religious freedom is not always defined the same way. And that's where we have our conflicts. We have countries right now that say that within their own constitutions that they do respect religious freedom. However, you must register with that country, and if they don't recognize you as a religious entity, then you are not accepted, and therefore you are persecuted, oppressed, thrown in jail. We look at the Uyghur situation in China, where they're being forced into re-education camps. We see all of these things going on. And so there is a vital importance for people to understand and come together under these common principles that the sanctity of life is important, that all of us have a right to serve or not serve any God we wish. And when we can come to those common principles and come together on that, then we understand that we must protect one another. Simran said it so eloquently that when we look at our own religious communities and we tout the issues and the problems we're having, people get tired of it. But when I can stand with my brothers and sisters of every different faith and say, hey, there's a problem here, we want to support you and work with you so that you're not oppressed, so that you're not persecuted. And that's what these roundtables really do. It really shows a universal convening, a collective voice that can speak to issues and really speak to them clearly. And the great thing about our roundtables is that they're what we call an opt-in, which means that if somebody presents an issue and is looking for people to help support it, you can either support it or not support it. And that way it allows you to stand where you feel you need to stand, but at the same time, support where you want to support. And I think that's the thing that's so important, that as we look at these issues, that's how we move forward. So again, thank you very much for this opportunity. I give it back to you.
Correct, Dr. Paul. You touch all the points. It's a pleasure, to see, and you are right here. I want to say, when you said, what Mr. Greg Mitchell developed from the 1 decade, and work closely, with State Department and to USIDHR, to develop the rules and of roundtable, because when you go in other countries, everyone said, oh, we do roundtables, it's not a problem for us. It's like something is common sense, and when we explain what is the rule of the roundtable, and everyone is equal on that table, and it also what it's invited by be part of that constitution and not be accepted by that constitution, of that country, that we make a difference in those countries to understand, okay, maybe you are majority in this country, but you are minority in other country, and how you can create this kind of balance to help your, I'm an Orthodox. I can, maybe in the country where I came from, is 90%, but I'm living in another country, which is not 90%. Okay, and not here in the United States. Maybe I'm moving in Africa. I will be 90%. I will be 5%. And how I can work, for my brothers from the same faith to help me and create this kind of collaboration, which Mr. Chaima, represents. And thank you. That is not an issue there, and how we protect each other, because we are majority in one country, but we are minority in that country. And why? And here in the U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, we encourage any human rights consultant, after pass our trainings, and also in human trafficking prevention, they need to see and watch, and attend the International Religion Freedom Roundtables. Also, to see the reports from USIDHR, because that is very important to educate those, to create awareness to those individuals, on the civil society. And also our role here is, on the diplomatic side, to understand, to educate the diplomats, how United States play the role, and how we want to create this kind of support of the knowledge for them to duplicate if they want in own country, and create that an examples for themselves. Not us, we are an example. Us, we create the tools, because that we create, international regional roundtable. It's a tool to duplicate in other countries and create that role, which they need to understand how to do it. And also, thank you so much. We have a beautiful questions. People are very excited, and yes, we keep them very informative. Our network with what happened in USIDHR and also roundtables, and I invite them. And also the question came up, if in our time permit, yes. One of the questions say, how can we protect religious freedom post-pandemic? If you can address 2-3 minutes, because after that we have another questions which is important, and I want to have your feedback as well. If somebody 2-3 minutes, the Honorable Nadine Menza, can you?
Sure. So I think with protecting religious freedom after the pandemic, I think it's important that every group has the same rights. So, if people are allowed to go to a casino, they should be allowed to go to a house of worship. So I really think protecting religious freedom at this point in time is to make sure that religious groups aren't being discriminated against as things are opening up or closing, depending on, how different countries are dealing with the health emergency. Obviously, governments have the right to close houses of worship and close other organizations because of health situations. So no one's, and certainly USIDHR has not challenged that. We're just saying it needs to be consistent and fair.
Oh, thank you so much. Greg, what is your feedback on this?
Well, I agree with what Chair Maenza just said, and you know me, you won't be surprised by my answer. But see, that's why if you have a roundtable set up already, and something like COVID-19 happens, and all of a sudden you see governments like going too far and being like, doing unequal treatment and shutting down churches while they're allowing casinos to stay open, for instance. That roundtable should jump into action. You should have that multi-faith roundtable all get together. They draft a multi-faith letter to the government officials that have gone too far. And then ideally they would all sign this letter, and you have people of all faiths and beliefs signing the letter. Then you reach out and do meetings and communications in multi-faith fashion as one united coalition. Right. And so that's why if you have this, imagine if you had a network of these roundtables. We have one in Washington. We actually need these roundtables all over the United States, though. Right. Washington isn't enough even for the United States, and domestically, religious freedom is under attack as well. So imagine if you had these roundtables all over the country and then all over the world, and something like this happens, you can then, activate these roundtables in each country where there's a problem, and then you have these multi-faith communications going to government, and governments are much more likely to listen and respond, the way we want them to, if everyone is united and working together, rather than each community working all by itself and complaining, right, or filing their own grievances all by themselves. But that's my answer.
No, thank you so much, Greg. Thank you so much, Your Honor, Nadine. Dr. Paul or Mr. Schimmer, any comments on this?
I do have a quick comment. And sorry, Paul, if I cut you off. The religious freedom has to always be protected, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. The problem is that we live, well, it's not a problem really, it's beautiful. But the situation is that we live in fluid societies. Here in the US, in each county, city, state, in the country, and then in our international relations with our partners, it's always fluid. And this country was founded on freedom of religion for all people. Then you got the Mormons, and you got one state. Of course, they experience plenty of discrimination everywhere, but then one state says leave the state. That was Missouri in the 1800s, you can be shot on sight. And so, if you rest on your founding values, then you're going to lose them, because unless we're vigilant together, things slide. And our job is to not let them slide, pre-pandemic, post-pandemic, and certainly during the pandemic. And the reason it's important to have houses of worship protected when you have casinos, etc., is because, sure, people can pray from home. Sure, you can take a while to just inflect and do that service to your society, to not put everyone else at risk with the virus. But if your right to practice your faith isn't protected, then everything else slides. So all over the world, we have to be vigilant all the time, for better or for worse.
No, it's very true, Dr. Paul. Dr. Moran.
Sure. Thank you. I don't know how much more I can add to these excellent comments that have been made already. I believe that when we look at everything that's going on in our world today, that we're really polarized, and we really need to come back to the fundamentals. The faith community has always been the center and the core of every community, and people are trying to push them to the side. And I think it's important that we maintain in the public square the space for everyone, even post-pandemic. So thank you. Thank you.
Welcome. No, it's a very good comments, and I think, our participants, they understand, based on these questions. The second question which I have, from the public was, how can civil society help support other countries that are currently on CPC, list, which means country of particular concern, to improve their religious freedom policies? I know we can discuss more, but I want to have 2-3 minutes from you guys, because I know you can discuss more and elaborate. But your honorable Nadine Menza, please.
Sure. Thank you.
This is very important, because all the time, we people, they say they don't have countries. They say we don't have problem, but I say let's check the CPC, and
right. No, this is a great question. I have a two-parter. First of all, if you're at home and you feel like you want to speak out and help a country, one of the best things you can do is tell their story. Tell the story of those being persecuted, because until people understand that there is persecution in that country, other countries aren't going to necessarily act. And so, with social media, everybody can play a part in raising awareness of the situation on the ground. But in terms of civil society in these countries, I can't overstress how important it is to listen to conditions on the ground, to listen to the people on the ground, not necessarily the people that speak English, not necessarily the elite. So what's happened is as the years have gone by, as the U.S. has in more dangerous countries, kept their diplomats behind embassy walls. So you have countries where really people from outside aren't necessarily going to the grassroots and hearing, and maybe they're having them come into the embassy, but you don't always hear things the same way. So it's hard for me, for U.S. policy in specific, which is what we focus on at USIDHR, is, for U.S. policy to get it right, they need to listen to the ground. They need to listen to people on the ground, and every situation is different. You can't cookie cutter. So civil society here can support civil society in these countries. And I can't overstress how important the Earth Roundtable has been in this. I've traveled all over the world, and I can tell you that it's really transforming the religious freedom opportunities for us as these grow throughout the world, and give people the opportunity to hear from one another, give the interfaith dialogue that's happening, and also the governments to be able to hear, and be able to represent all their religions in the government. Because if they're sitting at the table with these religious leaders and with civil society, and they're starting to see the world through the same glasses, imagine what that could mean long term for religious freedom and for human rights in general. So I just want to commend all of my panelists, for Greg and the whole team, for the work they've done on these roundtables. But really, if you're part of civil society and you want to, you've got to know what's happening in that country on the ground and support them. They're the ones that are going to make change their country.
Wow, Your Honorable Nadine Menza, thank you so much. This, I think this is a very clear message, for everyone which is watching us, from any country, and I think is very, a powerful message. Doesn't you don't need to speak English. If you have a voice, you can reach out, and you can share. And Greg, I think he can say more, because he's working diligently. How to make sure that message is not a BS. It's real message, based on the facts. And which that is important. The facts, and not only the story and the drama. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell.
Yeah, thanks. And I want to build on what Nadine just said. Yeah, sharing the stories is the first part. You can getting those stories known, raising public awareness, raising awareness among governments and parliamentarians that advance religious freedom, and getting them to communicate with the government, that is on the CPC list, and urging them. But so that's the first thing. And again, so traditional advocacy, name, blame, and shame, that's part of it, because that helps get that government to open up to discussion on how, because a lot of these governments say, how can we get off the list? They don't want to be on that CPC list. Right. So once you put enough pressure on them, they say, hey, I want off of this. Then you can start doing engagement. And you have ideally a multi-faith engagement and other government engagement, with that government that's restricting religious freedom. And it takes time sometimes, but the Religious Freedom Roundtables is part of that civil society engagement, where again, what Nadine said too, because we invite governments to sit at these roundtables as well. So you have representatives of all faiths and beliefs sitting at the same table. You have the government sitting there, even in these countries of particular concern. And a couple of those countries have fallen off the CPC list now. And it's not only because of the work of the roundtables, but it's definitely part of it. It all adds up together. And I'll just name two examples. One is Kazakhstan was on the special watch list, which was one step short of the CPC list, but they have fallen off the special watch list now. Some people, may argue that they should have stayed on it, but we've been engaging with that government for 8 years now. And at first they were like, we're fine, that we don't need to change, but now they're working with us. We're setting up religious freedom roundtables in 9 different cities in Kazakhstan. The government is at each one of those roundtables, and they're working with us to develop and then execute a roadmap to reform that will eventually, secure religious freedom for everyone, hopefully. But that's the roadmap we're on. And now we're starting down the road with Uzbekistan, and they were on the CPC list. They have fallen off. That doesn't mean they're done and it's a perfect society now, but this is how this engagement, the name, blame, and shame gets them to the table. Then you engage and you offer to work with them, and you show them why it's in their self-interest. Again, economic development is a big part of this, economic prosperity, why it's in their self-interest to do this. And then you go down the road together, if that makes sense.
I just want to jump in real quick that we have a lot of comments I'm reading asking about how to learn about the IRF Roundtable. So I was just going to share the IRF roundtable.org, I believe. So you can go to the website, sign up. They just do the most amazing work. And so make sure to visit the website.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I think, thank you so much, Honorable Nadine Menza and Mr. Greg Mitchell. I think, it's very clear, right now, how those advocates, in those countries, they understand, and it's a lot to do. It's a lot of work to do. And also another good example was with Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan was the same. Was they start to work, and they joined the round table, and our colleagues would work in that region. They create many roundtables there, and people understand in the end, and the government take actions, and right now they make progress. We have more examples, we have more to say here, but again, I'm grateful and for taking the time to be with us today here. I know you guys are very busy, and it's a precious for us, and this unique Diplomacy and Human Rights Summit annual, to have you, and we can create that awareness to our public, and to understand, about international religion freedom and how we can get together and work together. And doesn't matter what issue will be, we can work together and find solutions for short term or for long term. Again, it is a pleasure to have you again. Grateful and welcome from our U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights to all the panelists. It's I have you on my heart all the time, and thank you for participating today. And we can continue our work because we cannot stop here. Thank you so much, everyone, and looking forward, to have you to the next annual event, our summit next year. And before that, I think we can have examples for one of the participants here to say, hey, that will change my life, transform me, because I listened to this and I take action. And right now I create and follow the roundtables in that country and make a change. I think that is important, and that is a good example for us to show them, to give the tools and the guidelines, and for them to make a change. Thank you again. Thank you for your time. It's a pleasure. And I will introduce right now the next panelist and the next host for the next panel. And thank you so much again for you. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Okay, guys, thank you so much. It's, I have no words, to, it's amazing, to have this opportunity, to have you here, and right now, let me introduce one of my team members of U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights. All the time when I'm doing this kind of international regional freedom, it's to my heart, and I hope you understand that. You have a good example here, having the chair from the Honorable Nadine Menza, from USIDHR, and the people which are doing the work in religious freedom, Mr. Greg Mitchell and his team. And let me introduce right now, our senior research associate at U.S. Institute of Diplomacy and Human Rights, Olivia. She's an advocate and women's reproductive rights, to moderate the panel on women's rights. Hi, Olivia. How are you? Can you hear me? Okay.
I'm good. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you for being here, and you. Thank you for being. Here I want to say to everyone, who joined. Olivia was our intern, and joined USIDHR a long time ago, and after that, she was a volunteer. She did an internship with us, and after that, she's one of the board of directors, and also, our research associate. Welcome for what you're doing, and thanks so much. We're proud of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just say before we get into the panel, President Wancha, Honorable Nadine Menza, Dr. Paul Murray, Mr. Greg Mitchell, Mr. Simrad saying, wow, that was such an enriching session. Thank you so much for all that you taught us. It was an absolute honor to hear you speak and to learn so much from all of you. So I hope everyone is ready, apologies, for the next and final session. We do have another line of amazing speakers who are ready to share their work with you. I was having some internet connection problems earlier. Sometimes that happens with live events. If I do drop off, don't worry, the session will still continue. So to continue with what was touched upon in the religious freedom panel, women are one group which become increasingly vulnerable when particular articles of the Universal Declaration are not upheld. It is, however, disheartening that in 2021, we still have to have a discussion on women's rights, but we do. While the number of female professionals around the world is growing, we still face a lot of obstacles, from gender-based violence to limited participation in decision-making, and we're exposed to lack of security, safety, and are often victims of human trafficking in a higher proportion than other groups. Article 1 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. They are endowed with reason and conscience and should act towards one another in the spirit of brotherhood. At USIDHR, we want women to access their potential and understand that knowledge is power. And through our Let Her Lead program, we aim to equip women and girls with the knowledge and tools they need to make active choices about their life and give them what they need to take control over their own circumstances, whilst being aware of the unique dangers that they may be subjected to and how they can protect themselves from that. So if the production team could allow my wonderful guests for the panel to come on the screen today, I can give you a brief introduction and then give you a little run through on how this panel is going to go. Hello. For the panel to come on the screen today, I can give you a brief introduction and then give you a little run through on how this panel is going to go. I can hear myself twice. So here with me today, we have Mr. Nick Papandreou, who is from Greece. We have Judy Aricho from Kenya. We have Lynn Shaw from the USA, and we have Dr. Shirley Small from the USA. So each guest will be allowed 5 minutes to speak and present their work, tell us about what they're currently doing, and then we will have a panel discussion. Judy Aricho from Kenya. We have Shaw from the USA, and we have Shirley Small. I can hear you.
Sorry.
Don't worry, it's okay.
I'm hearing the place. I'm sorry.
If you could just mute your microphone. There we go. Thank you very much.
There, I was hearing some double talking or laughter, which is fine.
I think someone may be listening to the stream in the background. That's all okay. Don't worry. So each of you will be given between 5 and 7 minutes to discuss your work, tell us about what you're currently doing, and then we will have a panel discussion where we will have some questions from the audience. So first up, I'm going to introduce Judy. Judy Aricho is the Executive Director of the Awena Love Foundation and partners with private and public organizations to educate girls to fight for their safety and their rights. Judy has already reached 24,000 girls all over Kenya to help them understand their rights, to keep them in school, and help them make informed decisions, and has built a sanitary tower supporting 300 girls every single month. Judy is doing all this incredible work, and I can't wait for you to hear more about her mission. Judy, the floor is yours. I can't seem to hear you. Okay, what I will do is, have you got maybe headphones that you could use? And what I will do is, if you find some headphones, I can move on to the next panelist and then come back to you. Is that okay? Perfect. Okay, so I will quickly move on and then we will come back to Judy at the end of the panel once she has sorted out her audio issues. So we'll move on to Nick Papandreou. Nick is an economist and an essayist, a semi-participant in one of the largest and most effective women's movements in Greece, the Greek Women's Union. Also writing papers on the progress or lack thereof of women's rights in Greece, especially in relation to the rise of post-lockdown femicides. Nick, the floor is yours. I'd love to hear more about your work.
Thanks. I just wanted to say the previous session was excellent. I didn't expect such sort of high policy talk, and I'm not going to go into high policy. I just wanted to say the lack of a roundtable in Iraq led to the rise of Al-Qaeda, but I think the only thing we could add to the discussion about religious freedom, there was no talk of women's rights within religions, but that's a whole other panel. But I just couldn't help make that small point. So I'm in an odd situation. The reason I'm involved in this, I suppose, as a thinking person, but also because I grew up in a family where my mother was head of the American mother in Greece, had created the Greek Women's Union, and so I travel around with her. So I have a echo. Okay. So I would travel around the villages looking for women. It sounds like an odd thing, who would be sort of a hardcore local organizers for women's rights. And it became a grassroots movement. I saw it from its birth. At first, when I saw my mother with her lower middle class women, not feminists in the Gloria Steinem style, just women who wanted their rights. I really didn't think it would work. Organizers for women's rights. And it became a grassroots movement. I saw it from its birth. At first, when I saw my mother with her lower middle class middle class. I'm hearing myself again.
Shirley,
Feminists in the Berger Steiner style, just women who wanted their rights.
Self-muted, I think
organizers for women's rights.
someone is watching the stream live on their computer, so we're hearing the feedback twice. Sorry about that. If anyone is watching, any of our panelists today are watching the stream live on another tab, if you could please close that, that would be wonderful, because then we can hear ourselves twice. Nick, sorry, continue.
I get to hear my my voice, not so great. Well, it did manage to legalize abortion rights, get rid of the dowry. I think it's the only country in the world where the woman, when she's married, can't change her last name. That's done for property reasons, so it doesn't disappear in the years of a marriage and then a divorce. Adultery is no longer illegal. It was illegal and you would be put in prison. And a family court for children and divorce, etc. But that, of course, made me very sensitive to women's issues. And I think my story is not so much the activism, because I'm not an activist in the sense that I see Judy is and helping kids like that. Mine is because I'm a public figure here to write articles, go on television and make the point about women's rights, which I'm sensitive to. And for example, I won't take too long. I just want to read someone I wrote about, and I also write fiction, and then these people the women become heroes in my upcoming novel or in my short story. So there was 2 years ago, we had an awful femicide, rape and femicide, where it seemed that the two young men, because they had good connections, and because it's a patriarchy in Greece, we know, even though it's moved quite a bit ahead, the thing was stalling. It just wasn't going to court properly. The father happened to be a wealthy man. There was an argument that the woman who was raped wanted it, consensual, those typical things. And the prosecutor, after listening to this woman prosecutor, born from this very same women's movement that I followed at a younger age, I'm older now, had a compelling argument at the end. And this is the kind of thing that I post on Facebook. I translate it from Greek into English. I write about it, and here I have a chance to say. So in her closing argument, I just read a little bit. We don't usually do that. Those who should be punished will be punished. There are some who believe that prosecutors are above society. But a prosecutor does not only have paperwork and procedures to follow, but is obliged to listen and understand exactly what is going on. I told the victim's father not to worry. I live with this girl now. All this time, the truth has been told in 1,000 different ways. The truth will now be heard one final time from my lips in summation. What is closest to the truth, and the truth you as a family need to hear, is that your daughter was led as an innocent lamb into the slaughter. Let justice prevail, even if all hell breaks loose, even if the world is shaken to its roots. Justice can see quite clearly in the dark when it wants to. And it's a kind of statement that caused ripples in the Greek society. She was lambasted by the male-run Lawyers Association for overstepping her role as a prosecutor. But there was a touching picture of the mother of the victim giving flowers to the prosecutor. And in my sense, that's a local hero. So that's the kind of person I write about. Another one, I'll just talk one more. A woman, because I'm in a family, I'm Nick Poppinger, a family that's been in power for many years. So people come up to me and tell me their problems. A woman's daughter was considered suicided. She was convinced that the daughter was suicided by a police informant. Now you can imagine trying to take on the police, which at the time in the 80s was all male, and trying to take on the judicial system. So she took her about 5-6 years to get the case opened again. And again, this is the kind of, and to solve that her daughter was killed by the police informant. But this took a big battle by the women's union to take on, the patriarchate. I have to use that word. I think the Mediterranean is like that in a country like Greece. And finally, now I'm 65, believe it or not. That's hard for me to believe. Probably older than most of the people on the panel. I'm sure I am. So when I was young and following the women's movement, I was inspired and the vision of the women. And of course, they had their own lives, like everybody. They had their lives, their problems, their love affairs, their children, and the women's movement. And now I'm older, and I thought that world is going to disappear. So that's my next book, about that women's movement and the lives of those women. Will it influence anybody? Well, I'm not writing a book to be didactic or social realist, but I'm writing a book to preserve that era the way I best lived it. And I'm hoping, and since women are readers, we hope the men are too. Generally, 60% of the readers in Greece are women and 40% the men. But once the book is out, I'll be on television doing the book tour, and these issues will come up again. And all of the issues we're talking about now, violence, how it is to be one of the issues which I bring up quite a bit is the discussions in the feminist movement were quite different than the discussions in the male political party. And it even have to do with if you're allowed to dress nicely. I remember I have a nice poster from my mother's archives, 1980. Ban all women's pageants, all women's beauty contests. In 1980, I thought that was a logical and proper argument to make because all the guys would sit around and watch those beauty pageants. And I thought, this is going to end. We're becoming 1980. It's a modern world. The beauty contests are going to go out the window. And I think those things, I sound like Nancy Reagan sometimes, those things need some sort of control in terms of what they do to men. Forget the side of the women. So that's the issues I take on and I write about and get into arguments with all my male friends. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. That was really, really interesting. Thank you so much for letting us know a little bit more about what you do. We'll move on to our next panelist. So we have Lynn Shaw here. Lynn is the founder of Lynn's Warriors, a non-profit committed to ending human trafficking and sexual exploitation by raising awareness through media and grassroots mobilization, advocacy, education, and policy. Lynn is passionate about forming alliances with fellow advocates committed to raising awareness and seeking permanent solutions to this horrific crime. Lynn, the floor is yours. I think you're still muted, sorry. Sorry.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear you perfectly fine.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, everybody. Okay, so everybody can hear me.
Yes, perfectly well.
Okay, good. Thank you, Olivia. And I'm honored also to be with my fellow panelists. I have a very different story, I think, from everybody. I have spent decades working in the entertainment business in Hollywood, and I'm based here in New York City on Broadway, and the production end and the PR strategies. And I had a client a couple of years ago who wrote a book, a well-known person who wrote a book about domestic violence. And as I was researching for this project, I really, I knew about domestic violence. I didn't really know the extent of it. And as I was doing the research, it touched also onto human trafficking. And I said to myself, I've got to do something about this. It was so bothersome. It overtook me. I didn't choose this. It chose me. And I literally, went on with all of my entertainment work and working for corporations and doing damage control, celebrities, companies. And I literally woke up one day, I sat up and said, this is so horrific. What is happening in the United States? And I'm in disbelief. And then the world around the globe, what are we going to do? We have to become warriors. I sat up in bed and said, we have to become warriors. It just came to me. And what I mean by that is that it is so big. We have to be realistic, and we have to say, we're not going to end this. We're not going to stop it, because I think being realistic, we all know there's so much money in human trafficking, in sexual exploitation, and it's exploding. And certainly we've learned all of this through studies during the pandemic. What are we going to do? We need to educate, raise awareness, but more than that, we need to intervene, disrupt the cycles, and get out there and be comfortable talking about it. Because the number one thing I encounter is it's a dark, ugly subject. But if we don't talk about it, people want to talk about it when it happens to their own child or their own teen or their own family. So let's get ahead of that and beat the predators at their own, game. Because right now with big tech, where a lot of this trafficking is happening, that's where everybody is. So I believe with the warriors, you need to start in your home. If we don't take care of our little girls who will eventually become the women of the world, what is this all about? We are facing here in New York the full decriminalization of the sex trade, pro-sex trade lobbying, meaning, if you're familiar with that, there will be nobody arrested for, pimps, traffickers, sex buyers, brothel owners. It sounds good. The messaging has been co-opted that, well, the people, who are the prostitutes will be free. But we know the realities are that full decrim, we don't want it. We want something called the equality model. We want to help these people, should they want the help, out of this oppression exit strategies, give them a place to live, job training, medical, psychological, everything they need to create a better life should they want, and hold responsible those who cause harm. How are we, if we have a full decrim, for instance, in New York, what is this messaging to our girls, and our young women? And I'm noticing, coming from the whole entertainment background, that the normalization and this escalation of all of these sexual things in the programming, and it is getting worse and worse and younger. If you really look at certain programming on cable, which I'm doing extensively now, it is unbelievable what is being thrown at our children. Again, our future, girls, teens, women. What does this say about women's rights? I am old enough, Nick, I'm right behind you a couple of years, but I'm old enough to remember here in the United States, the women's movement, and I think, and although I was like a young teen when it was all happening, and, I feel like we were more involved in those days in certain things, I feel like all that's gone away. It's slipped. Where is that? I'm not seeing it in New York. I'm not seeing it with my work around the country. So I think the only way is starting in the home, really making the children our partners, really, empowering, engaging them, making it okay, to talk. We can't be embarrassed. And then that'll strengthen the home. And if we all did that, that will strengthen the community. And here at the Warriors, I believe then it will, I have grandiose ideas, blanket our entire United States. And then that will make our connections and our collaborations around the globe, and we'll all help each other. But one thing I do at the Warriors, I constantly promote other groups, their studies, everything they're doing, because I also believe we can't just keep, Lynn's Warriors to myself. I have to be able to form this circle, and all this inter-promotion and talking to each other, again, will blanket certainly, my country, the United States, and then spread across the globe. That is my hope. But again, we're not going to stop it right now. We're not going to do anything. We have to intervene, and we have to just step up, not be afraid to talk about these things with our kids and each other, and do more collaboration on the ground, and be very committed on a daily basis of, you can't just do, for instance, one tweet a day. That's something, this is a separate show, separate, but you have to be committed. If you're going to do it, you're going to spend, realistically, can you spend 10 minutes a day? Can you spend an hour a day? And set that aside. This is your job. We owe it. We owe it to our children. We owe it to our young girls, the future. What is the future for our children? So my messaging is, I get out into the media and talk about it. I do a radio program once a week here in New York talking about all of these issues. You're all welcome to reach out to me, please. We need to just keep talking about it, making it, regular conversation. And I am just honored to be among you and help people around the United States and the globe.
Thank you so much, Lynn. Thank you so much for that. So I'll quickly move on to the next panelist. We have Dr. Shelley Small with us today. Dr. Shelley is the founder of Shares Hope Foundation, which she founded after being a survivor of domestic violence, after a long personal battle with her ex-husband, and Shelley is now ready to tell her story and protect others from being victimized through her nonprofit. Shelley, the floor is yours.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yes, I am so glad and privileged to be here to share my story, which I haven't been able to share, because as a pastor, I thought this would never happen to me, or this should have not happened to me, So I was ashamed for many years until that one day when I was brutally abused. I lost my memory, lost hearing in my left ear. I had my son almost cut out my stomach with a small machete. And, living in that situation, I couldn't tell anybody because I was ashamed, and it was too much to put out there at the time. But one day, it became worse. I ended up in a hospital where I almost lost my life, and that was the day that I made that change. And I decided I couldn't go back in this situation. So I went to a domestic violence shelter, and it was so different for me with my two kids at the time, because my daughter thought we were living in a box, because she was used to being in a big home, so she thought we were living in a box. But living in a box, as she called it, was much better than living with an abuser. So with that being said, living in New York, I lived in New York before I moved to Chicago. Legal Services of the Hudson Valley, they have helped me so much in the past, and I advocated for them, in front of a panel of about 500 women. And they raised that night $87,000 just listening to my story, because they were going to cut their budget. And after my story, they kept that budget for them. And I promised that if I ever had the opportunity to help someone, that I would, And while doing my research, globally, there are 736 million women, and 1 in 3 of these women are violated by their partners, And I think domestic violence is the thing that people they tend to overlook a lot. Even in the shelters, when you go into a shelter, you can only stay in this shelter for 90 days. And after 90 days, if you don't find an apartment with a budget of maybe $1,000, you have to go into a homeless shelter. So it's like from one shelter to the next shelter to the next shelter. And at this time I said, why did I leave my home if I am going to go back into another shelter? You understand what I'm saying? So I think there should be a plan in place where it's not just a 90 days period, or even if it's a 90 days period, because they have other women and children who, want to get in just like I did. There should be a program after that. Women don't have to enter another shelter. There should be a budget where at least you can have, a roof for your family and your kids.
Yeah.
So that's my story, and I would really like to join with other organizations to just get something done, so that people can understand the true, I call it the flip side to domestic violence. Yes, you want to leave, you leave, but many women go back into the same situation because of this problem, that they don't have housing, they don't have food, they don't have proper anything. You end up from one shelter to another shelter to another shelter, unless you have family or somebody out there who is willing to take on the burden, as they call it.
Thank you so much, Shirley, for that. Your story is just everything you've been through. To turn it into such a positive journey and to really make that change is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So the last panelist that we have today, as I introduced her before, is Judy. I'm hoping, Judy, that you've managed to fix your audio issues, as we really would love to hear the work you've been doing in Kenya, because it's incredible. Can you hear me well? Can you say and see if we can hear you? Is your microphone turned on? Try and turn it back on for me, and then let's hopefully see. Okay, well, I think potentially Judy's connection is a little bit poor, and I don't know if we're going to be able to hear everything that she has to say today, which is a real shame. The USIDHR team and I heard sound. the USIDHR team and I met Judy very recently, actually, in the Global Peace Chain Summit in Istanbul. And Judy was one of the contestants for the Youth World Cup with the work that she's been doing in Kenya. Judy's foundation, the We Know Love Foundation, which if Judy doesn't get the opportunity to present everything today at the summit, USIDHR will share links to her Facebook so you can see more about the work that she's been doing, because it is a real shame. We'd love... Can we hear you, Judy? But we saw Judy's presentation in Istanbul and it was absolutely phenomenal, and the work that she's been doing there single-handedly, just with a team of volunteers across the country, she's really making incredible change across Kenya, and that is why we invited her to speak here today, because of... Oh, I can see you, but I can't hear you, I'm afraid, Judy. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I think... Yeah, unfortunately, what I will have to do is, because we are quite short on time, is the USIDHR page will help lead everyone to Judy's foundation so that you can see more about the work that she's doing. But we saw Judy speak in Istanbul and it was incredible. Her speech was amazing. The work that she's been doing truly is absolutely wonderful, and I'm sure that USIDHR and Judy will get together at a later point to kind of share her work and share her story with you all. I'm really sorry, Judy, that you didn't get the chance to speak today, but don't worry, I'm sure we can rectify that moving forward into the future. As we are short on time, I kind of just want to ask, from a more experiential level, you've all worked in very different areas and you've all come from very different backgrounds, and I'd really kind of like to know what you think the biggest barriers have been, or what the biggest barriers will continue to be when it comes to protecting women's rights, what in your specific field. We have a couple of minutes, so if anyone would like to start, feel free.
I'll go if nobody. I'll start. You know, and I ask this question every day, whether it's other nonprofits, organizations, law enforcement. I work on the city level here in New York, the state level, and also on the federal level in Washington. It's the same response. I just keep asking it every day: lack of manpower, lack of resources, and that's basically what I'm told constantly. And I also think. Again, I like to be very realistic. I think for these issues, they're not a top priority. Although we see all of the numbers escalating and the lack of attention going on, I don't see them really. I hear a lot of noise, you know, as far as people talking, but then I never see things really kind of pan out. Every once in a while you do, but it's on to the next thing. You know, it's raise your voices about this, on to the next thing. I've been trying here in New York all month to talk about, last month was National Domestic Violence Month, the intersection of domestic violence and human trafficking, which they intersect. And nobody in the media, I know all the people in the media, they're like, Lynn, you know, go away, it's dark, it's ugly, unless it's maybe a Jeffrey Epstein story where they can get clicks and likes and something like that. Again, lack of resources and manpower. And so, again, that goes back to what I like to do with the Warriors, you know, grassroots mobilization. Start within the community, raise private funds, get religious organizations behind you. It's the only way, because although there are good things happening, whether it's at the federal or the state level, too much red tape. We don't have time. People are suffering. The kids are suffering. So that's kind of what I'm up against. I think all of us are kind of up against.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do agree with Lynn when it comes to domestic violence and human trafficking. You know, people tend to cover everything up. It's like your voice is not being heard.
Right.
And I took on a big responsibility to start this organization, which, you know, I have just started. But mental illness from human trafficking, domestic violence. You know, it's so hard to put your hands on and to accept, because even now I am still in therapy from 2014 until now. I am still seeing a therapist, you know, so this is something that follow you, you know, sometime all your life. My children, my daughter, my son, you know, it follows them. And I noticed that even in the schools, people tend to treat like the children. They don't know where you come from, but the moment they hear violence, they think, oh, you come from a bad background. That's not true. Domestic violence doesn't have a face. It doesn't have a home. It doesn't have a number. You know, it comes and it can happen to every one of us. But until it hits your door or my door, then people tend to speak out. And that's the shame behind women's violence. It's, you know, the way I felt back 10 years ago, I felt like I didn't have a voice. Nobody would listen, even if I spoke. And if I speak, I feel like, you know, I was discriminated on. So, you know, I think that should end. And we should all come together and let people know this doesn't just happen to the poor, the middle class. It can happen to any one of us, you know. Violence doesn't have a number or a face. Yeah.
Do you, sorry, just Judy, do you want to try one more time and see if we can hear you? Thank you for that, Shirley and Lynn. That was really wonderful. Yeah, try without headphones. Let's see. We'll try one more time. I can hear like kind of background sounds, but I can't hear what you are saying, unfortunately. I have the website. I have the link to your website, Judy. So what we will do is we will post that in our comments and we will connect with you and we can further display the work that you've been doing on the USIDHR page at a later date, because we are going to run out of time for this panel. So in terms of the question that I just asked, I was just wondering, Nick, if you had any thoughts that you wanted to just add on quickly before I have to do the close.
Sure. Well, at least with Greece recently had, it's a big number for Greece, 13 femicides and counting after the lockdown. And that clearly seems to have some link. Of course, then again, one has to go and react to the comments on television as she was such a nice girl, or she was a virgin, as if that makes it harder for the violence to occur. So there's a lot of bias. And so I think the hardest thing to change is the attitude, at least in my world of men. It's the world I live in. I mean, obviously, one lives with both sides, but as the kid, I have a kid who's sort of half American like me, but he grew up in this Greek society. Okay, he's learned to respect, but the stuff that he hears, and as Lynn was saying, that's why I say it sounds like Nancy Reagan. The songs my daughter sings, I wonder if she realizes the sexual nature of them that we didn't have years ago, and if that influences the whole situation. And the attitude that that men are, white men especially, here we are, grew up with privilege without knowing it. I mean, I've been taken to task on that, so I'm aware of that. So if you're just in privilege, you don't get it. You don't get that you don't own the woman. And the Mediterranean society and others, that's where the religion comes in. They have this ownership concept, which includes hitting somebody besides giving them orders. And maybe that, as Lynn was saying, stems from the family, from the society. It's a number of things which I thought they were going to stop. And maybe I was too idealistic when I was younger, that this we would get to the next stage, the same way equal rights, women vote, stopping porn, I thought at some point, and yet it seems to have backslided. And in the States, the level of discussion is way more sophisticated than in Europe, I would say, than in Greece especially. The fact that these panels are here that you're talking, we're talking, is a sign that there's many things happening, that it's being parsed and discussed, and the U.S. is often the lead on the rights of, I mean, Greece only passed recently rape within marriage last year with a real big penalty. There was the accusation in the past, but you get off free, basically. Yeah, you know, that kind of thing. So it takes time, and the U.S. is a leader. And one of the leaders is the television shows, which also can be very sensitive. And I know in the Latin American world, they have the telenovelas, the soaps that bring a lot of issues. So my thing is how we create this world, besides laws protecting women, like Dr. Small. The other question is, how do you get to the point where that guy never gets there? What are the signs? And the police need training, we need training. What are the signs in your own like little world of your own community that this guy, your friend, is violent? None of us have that training. At least I haven't been taught it. We only find out after the fact. So those are the discussions right now. So I think attitude and books help change attitudes too. Anyway, very short summation of my ideas.
Thank you so much. Honestly, this panel has been wonderful, and it has been an absolute honor to convene with all of you and to be able to hear your stories and listen to your work. It's really been a true honor to host you all. Obviously, unfortunately, we did have another panelist, but she wasn't able to communicate her ideas and thoughts, which is a real shame. But I am unfortunately going to have to end this panel here, as we have run over, which if anyone is familiar with USIDHR events knows that that does tend to happen. We like to talk, we like to let other people talk, so usually we run over. But yeah, once again, all of the guests here in my panel and all of the guests from today, it has been absolutely wonderful to have you, to host you. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us and with our audience, and it's been a real pleasure to have you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Thank
Thanks.
you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. So just like that, our first day has come to an end. Myself and the team hope you enjoyed the day as much as we did, and thank you once again to our wonderful guests for taking the time out of their busy schedules to be here with us today. It's been an honor to witness your passion, enthusiasm, and see the incredible work you're all doing to further your causes. And thank you to all of you for watching, for your presence and your commitment to making this first day a memorable one. Myself and the entire team at USIDHR are incredibly grateful to all of you for your support on the first day of our summit. Remember, for a limited time, as some of our team have been posting in the comments throughout, we are an educational institution, and we are offering some of our most popular training courses at discounted prices only for summit attendees. So any of the work that you've heard of today and you think that you want to start a professional career in any of these areas, we have training courses that will help you understand how to break into that industry and how to set up your own consulting firms, and how to, there's so much. We work really hard to deliver really unique training courses with experts in the field, and at the moment we are delivering them for summit attendees at discounted prices that will not be going on until the new year. So please, if you are interested in that, click some of the links that will be available in the comments. You really don't want to miss out on those. We already have a huge student community, as you saw if you've been watching from the very beginning. So yeah, please don't miss out on those. We'd hate for you to feel regret. And don't forget, we still have 2 wonderful breakout sessions later this evening. The first is on children's education with Jarvis Bestman and President of USIDHR, Manuel Oancha, at 6 p.m. EST. And then the second is our session entirely in Spanish. Of course, we couldn't have forgotten about our Hispanic community who is watching us from all around the globe. So we have prepared a special breakout session in Spanish led by one of our very own human rights consultants, Vicky Labea, and the founder of USIDHR, Isabelle Vladoiu. That will be at 7 p.m. EST. So you can join those sessions in the same place right here on the Facebook page tonight, and we would love to see you there. So, and that is all from us until tomorrow. We will be back using the same link and on the same page tomorrow at 11 a.m. EST sharp with topics on cultural and economic diplomacy. So make sure you come in early not to miss a single thing. We have another amazing day full of surprises with many ambassadors and diplomats joining from all over the globe, and they're going to speak to you tomorrow. It really is an incredible panel, 2 panels actually, that we have lined up tomorrow. We've seen in the rehearsals, we've seen the speeches, and we are so excited to show you what we have prepared. So please don't miss out, and we will see you all tomorrow. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for joining us.